upbeat.
"80 years ago this week, on the 8th of May 1945, there was a moment when our nation stood still. People gathered around their wireless sets as the voice of the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, rang out across the airwaves. After almost 6 years of devastating war, the conflict in Europe was finally over. Germany had surrendered. And so millions celebrated, swept up in the overwhelming relief and happiness of peace at last in Europe. A very good morning from our studio in St James's Park in central London. This week, to mark the anniversary of VE Day, we will remember not just the end of World War II in Europe, but the extraordinary men and women who played their part. We will be honouring the remarkable wartime generation whose sacrifice and courage 80 years ago helped secure our peace and freedom. We'll hear stories from veterans, testimony from those who remember VE Day, and we will enjoy the music that lifted their spirits during the war. Later this week, on Thursday, there will be a special service of Thanksgiving at Westminster Abbey. And that evening, a spectacular concert to celebrate VE Day from Horse Guards Parade. It all starts right here today on this bank holiday with the first of our anniversary events. A special procession will be taking to the streets of central London to honour the bravery of those who fought, reminding us of their service, their sacrifice and their legacy. In the presence of their Majesties the King and Queen, together with the Prince and Princess of Wales and other members of the royal family, the day will culminate in an impressive flypast featuring the Red Arrows and current and historic military aircraft. In about 90 minutes' time, at midday, led by the chimes of Big Ben, the procession will step off. 1,300 members of the armed forces, including the Royal Navy, the Royal Marines, the Army and the Royal Air Force, along with cadets, representatives of uniformed civilian services, accompanied by military musicians, are all taking part. And thousands of people are going to be watching. They are gathered here already, taking their places, lining the Mall and Whitehall to watch as it passes by. Well, let's go to the start of the route in Parliament Square. JJ Chalmers is there.
Thank you, Sophie. Yes, it is an absolute privilege to be here, to pay tribute to a generation that we all owe so much to. You can see that people are starting to make their way into Parliament Square here. There will be troops forming up around the Winston Churchill statue very shortly. He, of course, will have the best view of proceedings today. And that seems very fitting because, well, this place 80 years ago really was the heart of the celebrations on VE Day. We'll have troops forming up, as I say, very shortly. The Household Cavalry, Mounted Division, as well as the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery will be leading the procession today. And there will, of course, be a special tribute paid to Winston Churchill around about midday. And as well as crowds gathering along the length of the Mall, we'll also have some very, very special guests taking their place at the Queen Victoria Memorial at the top of the Mall. And I believe that Alex Jones is along at Buckingham Palace for us.
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, JJ. The procession will end here at Buckingham Palace. And as you can see, in front of the palace is a specially built dais. Now, enjoying the procession as it comes down the Mall is some of the very important VIPs of the day. A small number of World War II veterans representing the armed forces and the civilian services. Now, the atmosphere here is one of joy, but of course with an undercurrent of reflection. Later on, the King will appear on the balcony, just like his grandfather did, King George VI, and the Queen in 1945. And as he waves to the crowd, we'll enjoy a wonderful fly past.
Well, there is plenty to enjoy this morning and a few different ways to do it. Our VE Day coverage is also the BBC's most accessible live event ever. If you're blind or partially sighted, there is accessible commentary on the BBC iPlayer with Jason Mohammed. And you can access British Sign Language on the red button and on iPlayer. For many of us, the 8th of May, VE Day, is a day of peace in the history books. But for those who were there, they still remember the announcement, the dancing, the bonfires and the music as if it were yesterday. It was a celebration like they had never seen before.
Hostilities will end officially at 1 minute after midnight tonight, Tuesday, the 8th of May.
I do remember the announcement. My mother had a ear on the radio, and I was standing with her. We then put the flags out. Everybody was delirious.
The war was over, and we couldn't believe it.
Everybody took their tables out, everybody took their chairs out.
We did a lot of dancing, running round with the family and joining hands with other families.
It was the first time you could think about being happy.
It was peace at last, and it was just wonderful.
Today is Victory in Europe Day.
And I remember it distinctly. Dad said, "We're going to London, we're going into town." We went to Buckingham Palace, big crowd there, and Mr. Churchill came on the balcony and everybody cheered. And we were standing as close as we could get to the railing as to see them all. And I was a fan of Churchill, and I cut a picture of that in the paper and stuck it on the end of the bed. I was starstruck then.
I remember my mother taking the blackout curtains down. She was thrilled, absolutely ecstatic. We lived a life of brightness and light.
VE Day I remember well, because my father was at the party. In 1940, he was made a prisoner of war. But when he came back, we were marching up and down the road, banging pans and like saucepans, shouting "Rule Britannia." My mother was very happy, and so was I. It was total relief.
As children, it was very special because they opened the swimming pool and we could stay up all night, which was most unusual. And we were swimming and eating these chocolate things that the mothers had made. Rationing was on at that time. I mean, it was wonderful that the chocolate turned up at all,
I went up to London to meet my cousin. Everybody was laughing, crying with happiness. I mean, the things that children aren't allowed to do today, we did. We climbed up the lampposts, every single statue. It was marvellous. VE Day was probably one of the best days of my life. We let the adults listen to the speeches, and we just got on with having a good time.
It was peace, it was wonderful, something I'd never known before, really.
The war was over. People were then able to get on with their lives and return to their family and their children.
And then you suddenly realise what you've lived through.
And they lived through such a lot. Wonderful memories there from VE Day and the relief and joy that it brought to millions. Well, later on, we're going to hear one veteran share his VE Day memories with Her Majesty the Queen. He was invited to Clarence House to meet her. Right now, though, the historian James Holland is with me. Also with me are the broadcasting legends, Baroness Joan Bakewell and Angela Rippon. Lovely to see you all here. Joan, you were 12 years old on VE Day. What do you remember of it?
I remember the lights going on, because I'd grown up in a completely dark world. No lights in the shops, no lights on the streets. We had little torch to go round wherever we went. Suddenly, the lights went on, and that was a complete revelation that the world could be lit, you know, because one was fearful that the Germans would see a light and would bomb your town. But suddenly it was possible to have lights on everywhere.
It's very hard to imagine that now, because almost 6 years, and it was blackout, wasn't it?
Totally blackout. Everything was blackout. And the windows had to be very careful. You hadn't to have a chink of light coming through your window. Otherwise, someone knocked on the door and said, you're sending a signal to the enemy. And you had to be very careful. Blackout curtains had to fit, not show any light on the streets at all.
And all that changed on VE Day. James, it's really important to remember that VE Day was the end of war in Europe. It wasn't the end of the war.
Yeah, there was another 3 months to go, and incredibly brutal fighting. I mean, while people were celebrating VE Day on Okinawa, for example, one of the bloodiest battles of the entire Second World War was being played out in the Pacific. And of course, there were all the horrors to keep going on in Burma, and also, of course, we had the atomic bomb around the world in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I think the other thing that's really important to remember is that at the time, no one knew in America or in the UK that the atomic bomb was going to be ready in time. And so everyone was facing up to the prospect of invading the Japanese home islands with casualties of up to several million. So, you know, it was mixed emotions from the world's leaders, certainly, and from many people who were going to be involved in
Angela,
that.
you were not even 1 year old, were you,
No.
at the end of the war, VE Day? But your father, he was in the Far East.
Yes, he was. I was just 7 months old when we were celebrating VE Day here. My mother had been in the ATS. She wore the uniform. She was a lorry driver during the Second World War until she became pregnant. But my father, when we realised that war was coming to an end in Europe, the ship that he was on at the time, which was the Newfoundland, was sent to Japan to join the American Fifth Fleet. And yes, so he was there when the bombs were dropped.
Wonderful photograph. That was you being held by your father the first time you met him, wasn't it?
The first time I met him, because at the end of the war in Japan, which was, I think, much later, wasn't it, in September or August?
The signing was on the 2nd. The surrender was announced on the 15th of August.
On the 15th of August. And, well, my father was there again for he was present on his ship when the Japanese actually surrendered to the Americans. But I think the War Office in Britain decided they didn't want everyone coming home at the same time, didn't they? So they kept my dad's ship and all his shipmates out there in Japan, and then they brought them home the long way around via the Americas. And he came back, and that was me meeting my dad when the ship came into Plymouth Harbour.
What a moment.
And I had not seen him, and that's why I've got that sour expression on my face, because I thought I'd been brought up by my mum, my aunt and my grandmother, and here I was in the arms of this man that I'd never met.
And James, we must just underline, I mean, the importance of these celebrations, commemorations today, 80 years on, because 5 years ago we were supposed to be seeing similar scenes and we didn't.
Well, that was, of course, the pandemic, so we weren't able to do the kind of great hurrah that we are able to do today. But I think, you know, what one also has to remember is just the totality of the war back in 1939 to 1945. It's kind of unimaginable scale. You know, every man, woman and child in the United Kingdom was affected directly by the Second World War in a way that no other conflict has touched them. And you think about all the kind of tens of millions killed, the even more millions displaced. You think of the carnage, the destruction around the world, and even here in the UK. It's really, really important we never lose sight of that.
Thank you.
What is interesting is I remember rejoicing at the dropping of the atomic bombs to bring the war to an end. Of course, looking back, it was a horrific event too, and I've since been to Japan and seen the devastation, but I remember rejoicing that we had a nuclear weapon that would bring the war to an end.
Well, we're going to talk more about all of this in a moment, but victory in 1945 was very much inspired by the leadership of Winston Churchill. And we're going to be hearing his words from that iconic Downing Street announcement many times this week. Let's go back now to JJ, who is with someone who has a key role before today's procession.
I'm with award-winning actor Timothy Spall, who, of course, portrayed Winston Churchill in the film The King's Speech, as well as I remember the closing ceremony of the London 2012 Olympics as well. And you'll be portraying the great man again today in the presence of his statue. Tell me, how are you feeling to be part of this?
Well, apart from slightly apprehensive, a bit nervous, very, very honoured to be standing in front of that great man and to deliver an extract of one of his speeches that, you know, sums up the solidarity and his appreciation of the solidarity that the people of this island showed. And it also means a lot to me because I was brought up like 2 or 3 miles down the river there, and my parents went through the Blitz. I grew up with an air raid shelter in the back of my house. You know, most of our backyard was the air raid shelter because it was a small yard. So, and that signified the fact that my mother and her sister and my granddad and Nan, they went through that war together in that house. My dad, his family for Nine Elms, they went through the Blitz. My dad's brother was killed in the Second World War, the oldest son of 6, as a young man on the Adriatic coast of Italy. So I have an association with it, you know. And oddly, I feel in a bizarre way, although I was born 14 years after the end of the Second World War, that I went through it because I grew up with this air raid shelter, which my brother and I tried to take down with a spoon, by the way. We took an inch off one brick. But I heard about it. I grew up with hearing about it. It was a true experience, an incredible experience of anguish and pain and triumph for people. So I do feel a strong association, a great privilege. I've also got my granddad's medal in my pocket from his campaign in the First World War. So I do feel greatly honoured to be a part of this.
Oh, wow. We wish you the best of luck, and we cannot wait to see you portraying such a great man for such an important occasion. Thank you so much for taking the time to have a little chat with us ahead of it. I hope the nerves will settle.
Well, let's hope so.
We're looking forward to that procession later. Joan, what do you actually remember of VE Day itself? Do you remember all the parties, the celebrations, the dancing?
I certainly do. One, it was such a relief, and I'd never lived in peacetime. So I'd lived in a dark world, and I remember the lights coming on, and that was such a new world for me. But I also remember the celebration in Stockport. They sent an illuminated tram along the lines out of the city, and I lived at the terminus, and this illuminated tram arrived, and everyone from the youth club came out, and we skipped round it singing celebratory songs and feeling great that it was our world now. And that was a great moment, and you never forget the sense of optimism. That was the other characteristic of the time. The world would get better now.
It's because you spent your whole childhood, just as you say, in darkness, didn't you?
Totally in the dark. No lights in the shops, no lights peeping out of curtains. Everything was dark. We went round with little torches to find our way. Suddenly, you could have lights on. And I thought, what a strange world. Is this now allowed? And everywhere lit up. Today, it wouldn't look very bright at all, but simply a shop window with its lights on was a revelation.
Angela, how important is it, do you think, to mark this anniversary today for the veterans who are still here with us?
I think it's terribly important because, as with any war, if you don't tell the stories, if you don't have the reminiscences, not just of the people who were at the front, but also the people who were at home. I mean, there were families at home. There were women and children and men at home who weren't able to go to the front. If you don't remember all of those stories that were integrated, that give you that sort of combined knowledge of what it was like to live through a war, you're going to lose them. You're going to lose the impact of them. And I think that living as we do now in the 21st century, with the kind of freedoms that we have now, we need to remember the kind of sacrifices that were made by people to make that possible. We live in Great Britain now. I mean, I grew up, not like Joan, because I was younger than Joan, but I grew up in a city that had been bombed in the Second World War, the city of Plymouth. I mean, I think over the very badly bombed, something like 6,000 bombs, over 200,000 incendiary bombs. The whole of the city was... I grew up in a city where I played on bomb sites because everything had been destroyed. I remember my father walking me into the wonderful 16th century church we have in the centre of Plymouth, St Andrews, which had been absolutely destroyed, just the walls standing. And famously, one of the primary school teachers, a woman, had gone and picked up a piece of one of those 16th century beams, and I'm telling the story, do you mind? And she picked
joining
in. She picked up this piece of wood and in chalk wrote on it Resurgam, and that went over the top of this church. And my father, when I must have been about 6, because Plymouth was not rebuilt until the 50s, walking me through that church. And then many years, no roof, just the walls and grass growing in the middle. That was the city, and my playground were the bomb sites. We played with bricks. Lord knows what we were picking up, what must have been in the soil of those things.
And Joan, I mean, you lived, didn't you, with the impact of the war for years and years afterwards, where there was rationing that continued for a long time.
Rationing went on for many years after the war. I mean, it lasted until I went to university. We still got rations when I arrived 5 years later at university. So what one learned to eat very little to make the most, and some very strange recipes, like I think bread and butter pudding came into its own at that time. Because you had to make the most of the taste you could have. You also had allotments in fields nearby so that you grew your own vegetables. That must have been very healthy. I do remember gathering spinach and thinking, what do we do with this again? Yet more spinach. But that presumably kept us healthy, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, lovely to talk to you both this morning. Thank you so much for joining us and telling us about your memories of VE Day. Thank you. We have got just over an hour now until the procession gets underway, and as we await the arrivals of the marching groups, let's have a look at the route that they are going to be taking. From Parliament Square, the different procession groups will go up Whitehall, passing the very balcony on which Churchill stood in front of the huge cheering crowds on VE Day itself. The procession is going to pass the cenotaph, all dressed in Union flags today, remembering all those who did not come home. Then they will pass statues to the men who led the armed forces with such great distinction. The statue of Field Marshal Viscount Montgomery, who was one of the most prominent and successful British commanders of the Second World War. Across from him, the Women of World War II monument, for all the women who made such a contribution to the war effort. From there, they'll go on to Trafalgar Square, which on VE Day was packed with these huge crowds, splashing in the fountains, singing right through the night. People climbed up onto the statues. And then the procession will go up the Mall to Buckingham Palace, where the guests of honour will be waiting. A very special group of veterans, the youngest in their late 90s, and their Majesties the King and Queen, along with other members of the royal family. Well, there are also going to be plenty of young people taking part in today's procession, representing the legacy that VE Day carries, passing it on down the generations. One of those groups is the Scouts, and Alex is with Chief Scout Dwayne Fields now.
I am indeed. Dwayne, congratulations on the new role. And it must feel wonderful for you to see the Scouts here on the route represented alongside the military.
Absolutely, it really does. It's a sense of pride is the thing that I can say I'm feeling. We've got 250 Scouts from all across the country here to support and to learn and to understand more about VE Day 80.
Well, I mean, legacy is the key word today, isn't it? And I know you've been doing lots of different stuff to commemorate VE Day, including the lovely badge on your shirt there.
Yeah, so we've had our Scouts up and down the country, inviting veterans in, hearing their stories, and just learning more about what it would have been like to live at that really difficult time and actually what it took to make it through.
Well, let's cast our minds back 80 years ago, because the Scouts certainly played their part as well, didn't they? Give us a flavour, Dwayne, of what they did during the war.
So Scouts have played their part as much today as back then. In the 1940s, during the war, we had scouts doing things like painting white lines along the curb to stop people tripping when there were blackouts, and there were many of them. We had scouts building Anderson shelters, administering first aid, supporting refugees. We even had scouts traveling by boat across to Dunkirk to lend a hand there as well. So they really did play their part.
They were playing key roles at the time. Now, I know that the Princess of Wales, you met with her in the Lake District, you and some of the scouts from Greater Manchester. And what will it mean for these young people to be here today in front of the royal family and the veterans?
I think what it means is they are here firsthand to witness, speak to, and learn from the people that they come into contact with. They're going to take what they see here and what they hear here back to their groups. And like I said, they come from all over the country. We've got scouts from Scotland and beyond right here. And I think that first-hand account of what they witnessed is really important and is what they're going to take back.
Absolutely. It's going to be a day that they'll remember forever, won't it? Dwayne, thank you so much. And again, congratulations on becoming the 11th Chief Scout. What a day.
Thank you.
Now, victory in the Second World War was a result of a combined Allied effort by the armed forces on land, sea and in the air. An alliance of all three services that shaped the modern military and changed the world forever. 3 veterans from the Army, Navy and the RAF, all of them now more than 100 years old, have been sharing their stories with us.
It's all teamwork. That's what the armed services are about.
I was in my early 20s. I was from a little village in Jamaica. We weren't Jamaicans, you see. We were British. I was proud to be part of the RAF.
I was 18 and a half when I was called up to the army. I wasn't too happy about it, but it had to be. 5 years I spent in the army. I don't know where the time went.
I was 23 when the war started. I think the Navy is entirely teamwork. Everything is done by teams.
People say, oh, you're frightened. No, we're never frightened because you're never alone. You have to be in the RAF to understand. There's a comradeship. They teach you that somebody's life depends on decisions you take.
You just picked your friends. Lee Ray from Southampton. We were always together, and we landed in Normandy about 5 days after the D-Day landings. We were 3 days on the road. When we got to Ostend, my pal, he had pneumonia. They took him into hospital at Ostend, but he was never the same when he came out.
There are many times where some played with somebody who you know personally, got shot down and never come back.
My cousin Roy was sunk in a minesweeper. My cousin Jack was sunk in a corvette in the North Atlantic. My cousin Jimmy got a military medal for bravery somewhere, but died of his wounds. And I was really the only survivor of the family boys.
It's about life and death. Look after yourself and look after your mate. That's what it was about.
Extraordinary to hear the stories there of Ralph Ottey, Ron Parker and Harry Waddingham. Well, I'm absolutely delighted now to be joined by Thomas Cuthbert, who played his part in the historic Allied victory. Good morning, lovely to see you here.
Good morning to you.
Tell us what you did during the war. You served with the Royal Navy, didn't you?
I was with the Royal Navy on LBO, that's Landing Barge Oil, which carried oil over to D-Day.
So you were refuelling the vessels, the ships there?
Yeah, small ships used to come up, landed fast ships, and
get filled up with the petrol and that.
Can you remember where you were on VE Day?
VE Day, I was up in Scotland. I'd just come back from France. We were over there for 6 months in France. And then we come back into England in January of 40, was it 45? I think so. I've lost all memories. It shows you I'm getting old.
You're 99 years old, aren't you?
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing to have you here. And do you remember what it was like on VE Day? Do you remember the celebrations?
VE Day, well, I was in barracks, and I like to have got back into London with all the celebrations going on, but we was on duty that day, and I didn't have a chance, but we had a few beers and that to celebrate, and that. It was a pleasure for the war to end. So many people had died.
I know, and it was a day really of mixed emotions, wasn't it? Because you were celebrating the war was over, but you had lost so many people, so many friends.
Yes, so many friends. I had relations who died during the tube disaster in Bethnal Green, where 172 people died.
That was awful, wasn't it? That was civilians who were killed. They were rushing for shelter and they slipped in the tube.
I had many relations, 4 relations passed away in that tube disaster. His cousin, aunt, my wife's mother, and a sister.
And that was here in London, wasn't it?
Yeah,
So many civilians lost their lives here in cities here as well as abroad.
That's when I was pleased that the war ended.
What does it mean to you today as a veteran to be here, to be taking part in these commemorations?
It's nice to see the old veterans, they're still about, and it's nice to see, you get to celebrate all the old people you come across. It makes you feel you're happy to be alive. Not that I've got many years to go. But there you are. I'll get a bit emotional when anything like this happens, and I can't stop myself.
I'm not surprised. But you are passing all of this on to the younger generations, aren't you? And the stories that you tell, other people will keep telling.
Yes, it's nice to talk about when some people ask what you done and what you didn't do. It fetches memories back with some of the people you will never see again.
And they were so young, weren't they?
That's how it goes. It's nice to see some people laughing and that over the VE Day. It's so nice to see youngsters asking questions. That does fetches things back, and that's why it's nice to go back to generations and see the old pictures of some of your old friends who passed away and got killed. It's nice to see little ones looking at the pictures of what you was doing and what you wasn't doing.
Well, Thomas, it's so lovely.
It's nice to see you.
Lovely that you came here and joined us today.
This program to talk. I didn't think I'd be on it.
Well, you are on it, and you are very much part of it. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us this morning. And I know you're going off to other events later on in the day. So I hope you enjoy those. Thank you. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you very much.
Well, throughout this week, it is our veterans like Thomas here who are very much at the heart of the tribute in Parliament Square. JJ is with another remarkable man involved with this morning's event.
I'm joined by veteran Alan Kennett, who served with the RAF during the war, as well as RAF Air Cadets. Emmy and Olivia, who have a very special role to play today with the Commonwealth War Graves Torch of Peace. They'll be a key part of today's procession. Tell me, how are you feeling about your role today, sir?
Well, I don't know until I get there. I'll tell you afterwards.
A real sense here.
I've never done anything before like this, so, you know.
Wow, I suppose in many ways no one has. This is quite a moment to be part of. Can you cast your mind back 80 years though? Where were you when you found out about the ceasing of the war?
I was at Celle in North Germany. That's where I was, in the cinema. And the CEO drove his car through the barn doors where we were, and everybody was sort of shouting, "We're watching this film, shut up, clear off." And he just said, "Well, I've just come to tell you the war's over." And that was it then.
Wow.
Yeah.
And here we are 80 years later. It's great to see young people being involved in this occasion as well and being able to honour this generation. What does it mean to you, Emmy, to be part of this?
It means absolutely everything to me, to honour those who served 80 years ago today, to those who currently serve, and of course to represent the RAF Air Cadets on this scale is absolutely amazing.
Olivia, do you have a bit of a message, I suppose, from young people to the veterans of this generation?
I think just thank you so much for your service, and it's greatly inspired me to be so brave and courageous on my journey in life.
Wonderful. Well, I hope those braves, that bravery and courage comes in well today. Go well, all of you. We look forward to seeing your part.
And there you can see live pictures of the Major General and his party heading down to Parliament Square to take their places. Now, we quite often, and rightly so, hear the stories of the courageous servicemen who fought on the battlefield. But behind the front lines, the war effort wouldn't have been successful without the countless men and women who did the often less well-known jobs vital in winning a war.
We had to join, we had to join, we had to join old Bevan's army.
Everyone had to go where they were told they were needed. They said, "Have you done driving?" I said, "Yes, I'm a qualified driver." "Ah," they said, "we need drivers." I became a staff car ambulance driver. I was a balloon operator. You know, the big balloons. To keep the Germans from spot bombing, your balloon was raised to a certain height. If the aeroplane hit the cable, it would soar through the wing. You had to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and turn the balloon. You had to keep it turned nose into wind. And you knew it had to be done, so you just got up and you might have a little grumble and say, "Well, I'm tired." But other than that, you just got on with it.
In the war, your ships, your power stations, your steam trains were all run on coal. It was one of the most important things to keep everything going. The Kent miners went on strike, so Winston Churchill told Ernest Bevin, who was Labour Minister of War, "We've got to find some man from somewhere." When I was 17, I went to volunteer for the Navy, but my number had been drawn out in a ballot. I had to go down the mine.
Help for the coal mines is now coming forward in the shape of Mr. Bevin's ballotees. Many would naturally have preferred one of the fighting services, but the majority have taken it well.
I was a Bevan boy, and I was devastated. I didn't know what dark was like till I went down that cage. It was terrifying. It was a very dangerous job. You had to be on your mettle all the time. Once, there was such a bang, I went flying. I lost my helmet, I lost my lamp, pitch black. And I don't know to this day how I got out. It was frightening.
We want more girls to drive cars and ambulances. If you're over 17 and a half and under 19, you can volunteer for the ATS.
Being a driver was very important. We went round and a soldier or a group of soldiers waved you down and said, look, we've got Charlie here. He's unconscious or he's screaming with pain. So we had to be medically trained. We had to know whether he'd got a broken leg or done something to his back or something like that. We were there because we were necessary for the running of the war. It was a very, very worthwhile job.
You don't look for recognition, you just don't.
Oh, yes, I'm very proud of the jobs I did, but I'm not a hero. I was never a hero. No, no.
I did a job I had to do because they had to have men underground. And I'm glad that I was one of them.
Amazing memories. Well, with me now is the actor, broadcaster, author and proud supporter of the military, Ross Kemp, an ambassador for the Royal British Legion, who have been instrumental in bringing veterans together for the VE Day celebrations. Good morning. Your family very much typified what happened during the war, didn't they? On both fronts, you had members of your family who were fighting, but also who were playing crucial roles behind the scenes.
Yeah, it was a world war, and it affected everybody, particularly in this country. You know, looking at what happened, working with the Coalition Collective to get people across the country to understand the sacrifices that were made. 450 British service personnel, men and women, and civilians died during the Second World War. And it's also really important to remember how many people came from the Commonwealth. Around 6 million people came to fight along British soldiers and service personnel, and 87,000 of those died. And my family, we lost people. We lost my nan's 2 cousins, who had been my great uncles on the Hood. That was a complement of 1,300 men, and only 3 survived. So all the way through my childhood, I was continuously being reminded of the sacrifices that were made by my family. My granddad, that's Dick, he went away in 39, didn't come back until 46. So he was absent all the way through my mum's childhood. She didn't recognise him when he came back. My great-grandfather, that's one of the 2 boys, that's Albert Buck and sadly Bertie Buck, both perished on the Hood. It was there, it was always there in my family. I was always reminded of the sacrifices that were made that enabled me and my brother to enjoy the liberties and enjoy the democracy that I live in.
And women in your family as well played a role, didn't they? Because I mean, there were, I think, 7 million women played their part in the war effort. It transformed women's lives during the war.
Totally. My Aunt Olive, I call her my great aunt, she was my nan's sister. She was in the ATS. She was working on the ACAC guns at Finsbury Park, and at the end of the war, she was asked to go over along with a contingent with Churchill to Berlin. While she was there, she didn't really know, but her husband-to-be was in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. The legacy of all the things they went through, and these were generations of people that didn't really want to talk about it. The legacy that they've left us is, for me, really, really important. It doesn't matter what your race is, what your religion is, what your class is. If we come together and we unify, we can take on tyranny and we can beat it.
We're watching pictures of the King's Troop Royal Horse Guard Artillery taking their places. They're coming down the Mall right now, heading down to Parliament Square, where they'll be taking part in the procession shortly. How important is it, do you think, for the veterans today, who will be here, who will be seated outside Buckingham Palace, to see this anniversary, this day marked?
I think it is so, so important for them to understand that we recognise the sacrifices that they made on our behalf that allow us to enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy today. And I think it's really important that we listen to their stories while we can. This will be the last big celebration where we'll probably be able to listen to them firsthand. And I think there are an awful lot of lessons that can be learned from them and the sacrifices that they made.
Ross, Thank you so much. Well, people are gathering in Whitehall and on the Mall to get a glimpse of the procession when it steps off in about 40 minutes' time. As I said earlier, our VE Day coverage is the BBC's most accessible live event ever. If you're blind or partially sighted, there is accessible commentary on the BBC iPlayer with Jason Mohammed, and you can access British Sign Language on Red Button and on iPlayer. If you'd like to watch events uninterrupted and commentary-free, please just head to the iPlayer. Right now, though, let's say a very good morning to Paddy O'Connell, who is going to be guiding us through the events this morning. Paddy.
Sophie, what a great pleasure to listen to you and your guests. I hope Angela Rippon's duck has vanished from view. The streets are swelling. You can hear the first of the bands who are arriving here. That's the band of the Boys and Girls Brigade. Parliament Square will fill with 1,300 members of His Majesty's Armed Forces. In fact, there'll be 7 military bands, including one on horseback. Hundreds more in the procession will fill this famous square from the civilian services and cadets. There will be members of NATO forces and a Ukrainian contingent. The King will lead the nation and the family from Buckingham Palace. A fly-past, including the sights and sounds of a wartime Lancaster bomber, will screech ahead of the Red Arrows at 1:45. I think we're all feeling this is one of the last significant moments to say thank you to the surviving veterans of the wartime generation. Around 50 of them will mingle with the great and the good for that most British celebration, a tea party, and that most proud moment of all in the garden of Buckingham Palace. One of the veterans told me that's when a cuppa will taste most pucker. Many of us watching will have family who fought and endured the 6 long years of the Second World War. People in this crowd have beloved parents and grandparents. Some of the wartime generation never told their story to their children, like the family of Betty Oliver. Their family found this diary in her attic after her death. She was a wren. There she is at Bletchley Park. And the VE Day entry in her lost diary, which was only found after her death, showed she was here. She decided at the last minute to switch from Bedford to London with her friend Anne. I shall never forget VE Day. No one who did not see London rejoicing could understand and imagine the scenes of pure joy. And I know this research about Betty because she was my mum. But I'm offering it really because there's millions of memories like this swirling today for us here and you watching. Now, this is the balcony where Winston Churchill made a famous speech, at least one of them, in fact. The Ministry of Health as was, and a line from this famous speech will be delivered by Timothy Spall, who we heard talking earlier to JJ. And those little windows there, I've retraced the routes. Those are the windows you see when the wartime leader comes out on the balcony opposite, making his famous V sign, and I've retraced this route today. There are clues all over the route showing us then and now. Now, we're looking at the band of the pipes and drums. They're led today by Pipe Major John Mitchell from the 1st Battalion Scots Guards and Pipe Major Michael Grant from F Company Scots Guards. The Irish Guards drums and pipes are led by Pipe Major Ross Fraser. Now, what's useful as we look at these amazing pictures as the main actors, if you like, are coming onto the main stage, is that we're going to get a chance to see all of the groups who will be in the procession from Parliament Square to Buckingham Palace. And we get a little moment to see them in this moment when they're marching on parade. The pipes and drums are made up from infantry soldiers of the Foot Guards Battalion. Let's listen to them. Now, they're one of the 7 bands here today, and they're leading on the first aid nursing yeomanry and the uniformed services. Now, the first aid nursing yeomanry have been deployed to every terrorist attack or major incident in London. They're marching here today. There they are. We will pick them up later as they go past the Women in War Memorial on Whitehall. They're marching to take their place on Parliament Square. You can see that this group are walking past Winston Churchill's statue. To the left of that statue is the balcony where he made that speech on this day in 1945. Now, we've got other uniformed services here today taking their place on the square, and I think we all know the number. We've got to reach 1,300. So we're looking at the police service, the fire and rescue service, the ambulance service, St John Ambulance, British Red Cross, proudly marching His Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, the Women's Royal Voluntary Service, all taking their place. The clock tells us it's 20 past 11. In 40 minutes, as Big Ben chimes, this procession will kick off from this crossroads of history, uniting our past with our present. We're looking at a band leading on the Army contingent, the British Army marching detachment that will be coming on today, the band of the Royal Corps of Army Music. It comprises musicians from regional bands and the British Army bands Tidworth, Colchester and Catterick, and the band of the Prince of Wales. Let's listen to them. So I hope we're all getting used to the forming up of the parade and the procession. Each group is coming on, led by a fabulous band, and we'll listen to them just a bit more, and then I'll tell you who's marching in from the British Army. So we're seeing the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers in this marching detachment, 1 and 2 Medical Regiment, 3, 4, 5 and 6 battalions of the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. This is the instruction that tells the band to turn. It takes huge organisation and expertise to arrange the formalities of a unique event like this, down to that hand signal. Look at that glove, that white glove. You need someone with very high standards and an eye for perfection. And here, that has all been down to the Garrison Sergeant Major, Andrew Stokes, who is with JJ.
Yes, thank you, Paddy. I'm very lucky to have you here because you've got a lot of responsibility today, so thank you for taking the time. Give us a brief overview of those responsibilities and what it's like to pull something like this together.
Yeah, of course. So I wrote the plan and I've trained everybody up to deliver, and then today I'm overseeing. I'm also starting the event as well with Alan, who I've just met, a wonderful veteran. But in essence, we are going to form everybody up on Parliament Square. You can see that behind me now. That'll take us to about 11:45. Then we'll have some wonderful World War II medleys. And then at midday, Big Ben will strike. We'll hear Sir Winston Churchill's victory speech. A torch of peace will be handed to Alan. I will ask Alan for permission to start the march past. I'm hoping he says yes. And then we'll get started, and the march will begin from here, past the cenotaph, shrouded in huge Union flags, quite poignant, to Buckingham Palace. And then at Buckingham Palace, a whole different array of serials shortly after that, but before the Royal Air Force and the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight.
Tell me, sir, not just for you personally, but what does this mean to those on parade? And I suppose for our whole armed forces community, what does this mean?
Well, I spoke to a lot of young soldiers, sailors and aviators this morning, and there's a whole load of excitement before they stepped off. And they're excited because they really want to do well, remembering World War II veterans. Everybody feels so proud about what they achieved 80 years ago. And actually that legacy has lived on. You know, I've almost been in the army for half that time, dare I say, giving too much away there, but I've certainly been inspired by that generation. And all of those lessons learnt, they've all transpired into everything that we deliver today. So everybody who's involved today is immensely proud. And of course what it does mean, and World War II is a reflection of this, is that we are stronger together. And on parade today, we've got NATO representatives, we've got Commonwealth representatives, and we've got soldiers from Ukraine. And that just exemplifies that phrase, we are stronger together.
Thank you very much. You're absolutely right. We've stood on the shoulders of giants. Go well today, sir.
Thank you very much.
There they are, the central band of the Royal Air Force. What Vern didn't mention, he didn't give us the age the Garrison Sergeant Major joined up, aged 16. So the central band of the RAF is one of 3 regular RAF bands. It's currently based at RAF Northolt in West London. Formed up in 1920. And this band supported the coronation of the King and Queen in 2024 and the D-Day commemorations in Normandy in 2024. Most of the personnel on parade here are from the King's Colour Squadron and 34 Squadron at RAF Leeming. Let me just mention the fly past that's coming. I can be certain that these men will be very proud indeed, as overhead 23 aircraft led by the sight and sound of a 1945 Lancaster bomber. And here the Royal Air Force contingent proudly marching onto the grass of Parliament Square to take their place for our procession. So we get a new band, and we're learning, I think, how this marvellous parade is forming. We're looking, oh, well, we will be having another look in a moment. Let me just get there in a moment. I don't want to get the wrong uniform. There we are. The band of His Majesty's Royal Marines Collingwood. And they're leading on the contingent from the Royal Navy. Let's have a listen. Now, I'm very grateful to a viewer, Major Bob Perry, retired of the Royal Marines. He heard me on a previous fabulous occasion like this refer to these as pith helmets. And he ticked me off. The helmets, he said, are of the Wolsey pattern, young man. So even though I got a telling off, I was very pleased to be called a young man. So the Royal Navy contingent, most of the marching personnel on parade are from the Royal Navy Ceremonial Guard, based at HM Naval Base Portsmouth. Hello if you're watching in Portsmouth. There's that balcony to the left of our screen from where Winston Churchill looked down and made the speech, a line of which will kick us off in half an hour when those famous clock hands reach the 12 midday position. Let's listen in to the band again. Most of the Royal Navy personnel on parade will see, but some of these Royal Marines are from Commando Training Centre, Royal Marines in Limston. The band led the Guard of Honour during the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II and was also part of the coronation procession of His Majesty the King. That's the band of His Majesty's Royal Marines, Collingwood. They have an operational role, these musicians, which is to receive and treat military casualties as part of a deployed hospital. I'm hearing a new band. There they are. Ooh, that blue St. Patrick's hackle, that will be stirring the bristles of many who have served and seen the Irish Guards, the band of the Irish Guards leading us on. Let's listen to them. We're looking at the flag of Ukraine because the Irish Guards are leading on a Ukrainian contingent. That's a very strong symbol indeed on this day, which we will discuss with James Holland in half an hour or so. But let's just take in this historic scene. Look at that white glove. And with the move down to the waist and out, he's telling them to turn and wheel right. He's in the gold state dress. It's made of 9-carat gold. And it's a sign that he's on display for the monarch. That's when the gold state dress is worn. And we're looking at a military badge from the Ukrainian forces. The representatives are those deployed to the UK on Operation Interflex as UK Armed Forces trains Ukrainian recruits. The UK has trained 54,000 Ukrainians in frontline skills since the war began following Russia's full-scale invasion. Now, then we are watching the arrival of Commonwealth countries and flag bearers from NATO. The Commonwealth countries shown here, the national flags carried by 16 Regiment Royal Corps of Signals, but the national flags of Canada, Australia and New Zealand are carried by military representatives of those nations. I've often heard it said that Britain stood alone in 1940, but when I get James here in our studio, I'll check. Britain stood with the Commonwealth. 6 million troops from the Commonwealth, 87,000 died. Let's take this scene in. I shall obviously be asking James to name all those flags one by one. Coming on to Parliament Square now, led by the band of His Majesty's Royal Marines Portsmouth, will be the Tri-Service Guard of Honour. Let's listen to the Portsmouth Band. Now, as we look back, just look at those different uniforms, the Royal Air Force, the Grenadier Guards, and behind them the King's Colour Squadron and the Royal Navy. Let's just have the sense of the Tri-Service Guard of Honour in this fabulous picture. They're marching on now, and their role will be in the Buckingham Palace forecourt at the end of our day, the Royal Navy Ceremonial Guard. The Portsmouth Band of the Royal Marines traces its origins back to the 1700s. The present band is a direct descendant of the Band of the Royal Marines Artillery, formed in 1861. And we're seeing Major General there, the retinue of the Major General, and when we get him back in our screen, we'll talk more about him. The Grenadier Guards of the Household Division. And although the Guard of Honour is representing all the armed forces, there are 56 personnel from each service: the King's Colour Squadron of the Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy Ceremonial Guard. Now, the mounted troops, we're looking at the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. This recalls the famous artillery of the First World War with those guns, the 13-pounders, which date from that actual slaughter, that conflict, at the start of the 20th century. And this unit expressly formed to respect and recall that tradition and the skills and horsemanship and bravery required to drag these weapons into the mechanized war at the start of the 20th century. Commanding Officer Major Luke Wadman. Now we're looking here at the Major General. Major General James Bowder, head of the Household Division. His horse, Otto. Behind him, the Colonel Guy Stone, Chief of Staff Headquarters, London District, Brigade Major, Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Fournette, Staff Captain George Lane Fox, and the aide-de-camp, Captain Alexander Villiers-Smith of the Grenadier Guards. Slightly frisky, I think. Just take it all in. The lifeguards, red tunics and white plumes. So the mounted troops are the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment, joining now the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. And I feel that our parade is filling the square. The red plumes and the blue tunics of the Blues and Royals. This helmet, designed by Prince Albert in 1842, and many of the serving forces have family who served before, so it's quite possible some of these helmets go back that far. Now, can I just tell you what's coming up? Because I know I will want to go silent when this happens. We're going to enjoy 15 minutes of fabulous music from these bands, recalling the great joy that music brought our families in the war. We will hear wartime medley, and we'll bring it to you in full. So I want you to get ready to look out for that in just a couple of minutes from now. And then at midday, the chimes of Big Ben. The words of Winston Churchill read by Timothy Spall, and then a starring role for a veteran. Alan Kennett turns 101 this month, and he will be asked by the Garrison Sergeant Major for permission to begin this 80th anniversary procession. So just to recap what's coming, we will shortly enjoy music from the wartime era, popular songs that kept us going on the home front, say those who were there. Then we'll hear the chimes of Big Ben. Then we'll watch Garrison Sergeant Major Vern Stokes turn to Alan Kennett, who joined the Royal Air Force in 1942, aged 18, for permission to begin the procession, which will end at Buckingham Palace. What a role for Alan. 80 years ago, he was one of millions, and today, Alan Kennett is one in a million. The hush you can hear is the anticipation as the bands get ready to bring the whole procession to focus. The role of the music in the military goes back to the use of the drum to keep troops in step and to keep their morale high. And morale will be very high, I'm sure, when we hear their fabulous music selection. In the center there, the statue of David Lloyd George, Prime Minister during the First World War. Now we'll hear the quarter chimes of Big Ben, and immediately after that, the baton will lift. So let's enjoy this historic moment. With thanks to our colleagues on cameras, we were able to see that was the Valiant Years. And we'll now hear War Days. And also, we'll be hearing a Cockney cocktail. Not drinking it, I want you to know, but hearing it. Songs of World War II. The music of the Second World War was instrumental in the memories to this day of what we talk about. Vera Lynn singing The White Cliffs of Dover and We'll Meet Again. Other hits of the war were very poignant. I'll Be Seeing You, popularly sung by Billie Holiday in 1941. Somewhere Over the Rainbow was very popular in the war years. It came from the movie The Wizard of Oz, symbolic of the war. And in fact, Judy Garland performed it for American troops live in 1943. Britain was determined to keep cultural activities going. Here we go with War Days. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Halliday, Commanding Officer of the Household Division Bands, is conducting Roll Out the Barrel. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye, I heard there. How many of those are you keeping up with? I heard Millie Marlene there as well. And leading the Household Division Bands is all day Stuart Halliday, Lieutenant Colonel. Now we're looking at the Major General's retinue. There he is on the white Otto. Major General James Bowder, head of the Household Division, General Officer commanding London District. He commands the procession today. He will ride at the very front, and we will see him have an important role later on as he tells the monarch that the parade is finishing and it's hoped to his satisfaction. That's towards the end of our day. He began working as the assistant military assistant to the Chief of the General Staff. He served in the Directorate of Joint Commitments in the Ministry of Defence, and he took command of a company in 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards and served in Afghanistan in 2007. He undertook a further 2 tours of Afghanistan during his career. In his retinue, Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Fournette, Brigade Major. In 1945, his grandfather, Flight Lieutenant Eric Fournette, an RAF officer, was released from captivity after more than 3 years as a prisoner of war. And his wife, Eileen, was on the home front in the Vickers factory in Weybridge. Don't dilly-dally on the way. Well, that was Knees Up Mother Brown, and played at a very fast clip. Mother Brown would be moving very quickly, I have a feeling, if she was following that rhythm and speed. So shortly coming is the quarter chimes and then the chimes of Big Ben. The Garrison Sergeant Major will ask permission from 100-year-old Alan Kennett to begin the procession today. He will then be given a torch for peace by a cadet in its design recalling peace. There he is. Alan Kennett will start our procession. I just remember those that didn't come back, said Alan. That's the thing that sticks in my mind. I'm lucky. I got out. There's a lot that didn't. Believe me. Timothy Spall reads from Winston Churchill's second Ministry of Health speech delivered on the 8th of May, 1945.
My dear friends, this is your hour. This is not a victory of a party or of any class. It's a victory of the great British nation as a whole. We were the first in this ancient island to draw the sword against tyranny. Every man, woman and child in the country had no thought of quitting the struggle. When shall the reputation and faith of this generation of men and women fail? I say that in the long years to come, not only will the people of this island, but of the world, wherever the bird of freedom chirps in human hearts, look back to what we have done and they will say, do not despair. Do not yield to violence and tyranny. March straight forward and die, if need be, unconquered.
May this torch for peace be a reminder of all those who sacrificed their lives with no thought of quitting the struggle. Let it be a symbol for the future. We thank you and all those that have served.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Thank you and your generation for securing our freedom 80 years ago. May I have your permission to start the parade, sir, please?
Carry on, sir.
Alan Kennett made the papers in 1944 when he bumped into his dad in Normandy. And now he's just started the 80th VE Day commemoration procession in the statue of his wartime leader, Winston Churchill, and shortly in the presence of His Majesty the King. The Garrison Sergeant Major.
Good morning, sir. Please may you start the parade.
Thank you, Garrison Sergeant Major.
Thank you, sir.
So, the events of the last 40 minutes have led up to this. Everyone had to be brought onto parade in smart style to get underway, and they will march up Whitehall, turn left at Trafalgar Square, under Admiralty Arch, up the Mall to Buckingham Palace. And I'm delighted to be joined now by historian and podcast prince James Holland. Hello, James.
Good morning, Paddy. What a day.
What a day it is indeed. And how are you finding the echoes of history?
Well, they're all there, aren't they? I mean, seeing so many famous regiments and units of the British Army, and of course, to see so many Commonwealth troops as well. It's a reminder of the fact that victory in the Second World War was brought by a coalition. And as you rightly pointed out earlier on, Paddy, Britain was never alone. Britain had her empire, her dominions, and all those countries answered the call.
Now, the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery, how did it get its name, James?
Well, it was at the end of the Second World War, and King George VI realised that the world was becoming mechanised and there was no more horse artillery, and thought it would be nice to have a horse troop saved for special commemorations and high days, and so created the troop on the 17th of April 1946.
And it's now those important reminders of our past from that First World War are going past the balcony where Winston Churchill made his famous speech that we've just heard a line from. And what was the importance of Churchill himself?
Well, I think it's kind of hard to say just how enormous his influence was, but it was huge. I mean, what Churchill brought was vision, leadership, drive, dynamism, energy. I mean, how often have people said in recent times, where's the leadership? Well, Churchill absolutely brought it. He also made people believe that the seemingly impossible was possible. I'm thinking here of things like the huge Mulberry Harbours, two of them both larger than the size of Dover, which were constructed, sunk, raised again, and then brought over the channel to Normandy in 1944. He was an experimenter. He was always prepared to, what we would say in modern terms, think outside the box.
He often took control, didn't he, from some of his generals. He was quite, when you read the memoirs, he wanted to get into the detail of the planning.
Yes, he did, and for every kind of, a dozen ideas, kind of only one was useful. But he had a great team around him. General Hastings Ismay was his military advisor and a military advisor to the War Cabinet. It was an incredibly safe pair of hands, very experienced and calm.
Now, as the King and Queen come onto the dais, let's join royal author and commentator Katie Nicholl. Hello, Katie.
Hello.
How are you enjoying the day?
Oh, it's wonderful, isn't it? I think it's, it won't just be us tuning into this to see these wonderful images. It will be around the world because I think here in Britain we do pomp and pageantry and procession and all of those wonderful P's.
Who's on parade?
Brilliantly. And, well, at the moment it's the Walesers. And, of course, I think we've just gotten so used to seeing the Wales children here at events like this. Little Prince George and Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis and, of course, the King and Queen. I mean, let's not forget this is the royal family, but this is a military family at its heart with links that span back to the military and this community many, many centuries. So I don't think you could expect an important day like today, the 80th commemorations of the E-Day, without the monarch. The presence is absolutely front and central to it.
And what is the significance of seeing all three children of the Prince and Princess of Wales? There's the Princess Royal. What's the significance of having the next generations?
Well, I think it's exactly that, Paddy. It is that sort of promise of the future. I mean, we're talking about so much history and heritage in today, but seeing the Wales children represents the future. I mean, let's not forget that when Prince George becomes king, he will, of course, be head of the armed forces. That is a role he will inherit.
Now, the princess, I read, is the first one under the law change to have her rightful place in succession. Previously, the men beat the girls.
That's right. Terribly unfair. And there will be no leapfrogging this time around. In fact, one of the things that the late Queen Elizabeth II ensured was that Princess Charlotte would retain her position in the line of succession. And I feel that, seeing the Princess of Wales here and her children, it sort of reflects a very modern monarchy. That's what we're seeing. So I think most people would agree it's absolutely right that Princess Charlotte retains her position in the line of succession. But this is, as much as this is about remembering the past, honouring those traditions, I think when we see the Wales children, it's very much a promise of the future.
And what can be said about King George VI? It's an important moment, James, to recall the wartime monarch.
Absolutely, and in my humble opinion, he's one of the greatest monarchs we've ever had. He's the first monarch to change the nature of the monarchy from the people serving the monarch to the monarch serving the people, and that's a really, really important change.
And do you think that's the way that the family changed from his daughter and to her son? Do you think that's the style he set?
Absolutely. Well, we know that Her late Majesty adored her father and was very influenced by him, and I think absolutely she brought his style of monarchy to her own reign, and you see King Charles doing exactly the same as well.
And Katie, when we see the continuous link between the royal family and the military past and the present, it's also, for me, of my generation, you feel we can't escape feeling that Her late Majesty the Queen is here in some way.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and this is, of course, the first time that we've seen the King at the VE Day commemorations taking the lead, taking the helm, because, of course, we're so used to having seen the late Queen Elizabeth most recently at the 75th commemorations, and, of course, if you think back, we were during those times of COVID. It was all socially distant, so there is that sense of continuity, and I think, as James said, that sense of duty, that is in their DNA. It is part of who they are, and that sense of duty before self, which very much started with King George VI, which continued in the late Queen Elizabeth, and which continues today in King Charles's reign.
The other thing I think is really important about King George VI was he was the first British monarch to set foot in North America and visited Washington in the summer of 1939, and it went down an absolute storm. The Americans just loved him, and of course this was going to be a very important PR exercise for what was to come.
Now, would I be risking myself if I said I think I've been to the home of the wartime American President FDR and seen the bedroom where the King and Queen slept? Could I be right in remembering that?
You could be, yes.
Yeah, I'm testing myself, shouldn't I? I should leave it to you. Now, we're looking at the veterans here, and this is Joy True we've just seen His Majesty talking to. And she joined the women's... There she is. She joined the Women's Junior Air Corps. She's 98. She remembers teenage boys in the Air Corps eager to fly and join up. She thought, I can do this. She didn't want to work in a factory, as her sister had done. She enlisted in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force when she was 17 years old. And her father wasn't pleased, so didn't sign her papers until the night before she had to return them.
I think, Paddy, it's also very interesting that we're seeing the royals with the veterans. Look at them; they're speaking with them, they're sharing stories, they'll be listening to those experiences. We know there's going to be a very special tea party at Buckingham Palace later on today. It's a real opportunity, and probably there are not going to be that many opportunities left for this sort of occasion, for this sort of interaction between the royals and these veterans.
And what about the Queen's father himself? He was also a decorated veteran.
Well, he was, and served in the First World War in the Battle of Jutland. Had that sort of first-hand military connection. And let's not forget the late Queen herself, of course, who trained as a mechanic and a military driver with the Auxiliary Territorial Service back in World War II. I mean, this is, as I said earlier, this is very much a military family. These connections are deep. They span generations. And I think when you see that interaction between the royals today and the veterans, there's a real fondness, there is a genuine, authentic connection here that means as much, I think, to the royal family as it does to the veterans.
And a reminder that there will be a tea party in the grounds of Buckingham Palace with the veterans, around 50, up to 50. We hope they're all on parade today, having their main lifetime achievement recalled in the grounds of Buckingham Palace. James, here we are, the Commonwealth flags once again. And I know you wanted to remind us that that line, Britain stood alone, we really should rewrite it.
Yes, absolutely. It's extraordinary, the effort of the Dominions and the Commonwealth forces. I mean, don't forget, India had the largest volunteer army ever in the history of the world.
And what's
Canada...
For you to see the Ukrainian detachment, what's so significant today?
Well, it shows that, where we've put our kind of moral compass in this current fight at the moment between Ukraine and Russia. It shows that we're right behind Ukraine, standing behind Ukraine, and quite right too. We in Britain feel that we fight for freedom and democracy, liberty, and we have a disregard for repression. And it's terrific to see them there.
I can't help thinking, if you'd told me at the 75th anniversary of VE Day that a Ukrainian detachment would be marching up the Mall, that I wouldn't have known, I couldn't have predicted why.
No, it's one of the great tragedies, isn't it? And it's a reminder of the fragility of the peace in which we live. We need to cherish it and appreciate, as we do on this day, the incredible sacrifices that were made 80 years ago to keep Europe pretty much peaceful for 80 years.
Because the generation we're celebrating gave us a rules-based order. Many of the institutions that were set up in the 1945 and onwards were by these people who'd seen the conflict of the Second World War.
Yes, absolutely. And the visions of peace that those leaders in the West particularly brought forward, a new economic system, a new global economic order, notions of furthering democracy, have been with us for the past 80 years. So it's not just about winning the war, it's also about winning the peace. And history shows us that when you get the peace right, it's a lasting peace. When you get the peace wrong, it tends to be over pretty quickly.
That's very chilling to hear that summary from you there when we know the headlines today. Let's just take in some of the sights and sounds. The procession is underway, and it's interesting the timing of it. No one who's left Parliament Square has yet reached Buckingham Palace. It's a reminder of how this procession is moving. The King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery and the mounted band behind. Now let's have a word about these horses, Apollo and Juno. The famous drum horses lead the band. It's recorded that as early as 1660, the regiment was preceded by its own mounted kettle drummer and 4 trumpeters. They hold the rank of major, these drum horses, the most senior animals in the army. In fact, James is saluting the horses as I speak here. Juno is the first mare to take this role. She weighs nearly a ton, and she has to be ridden along with Apollo, with the reins operated by the stirrups, with an adult in full ceremonial uniform, the 2 kettle drums, and Apollo pulled the carriage when the then Duchess of Cornwall visited the farm where both Apollo and Juno are from in Wales. There's Joy again with His Majesty, and to your point, Katie, the King is relaxed with people who basically are of his mother's generation. She a veteran too.
100%, and he will be. Well, obviously we can't hear what they're saying, but he will be listening to these stories. He will be, I think, very keen to meet with many of veterans, of course, some of whom he has met before. And that Buckingham Palace garden party a little bit later on will be another opportunity for these stories to be shared and these very important tales to be told and retold. And it makes me think back to those images. And of course, actually, we should also point out the Queen, of course. We talk about the royal family and its links to the military, but of course, Queen Camilla has her own links to the military. Her father, Major Bruce Shand, he served in the Second World War in the Battle of Dunkirk. Indeed, he was a prisoner of war in Germany. And I think one of the times that we see the Queen most moved and deeply affected is when she's meeting with veterans, when she's hearing their stories. And of course, she's Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Lancers, which is her late father's regiment. So that sort of sense of history and connection with the military community runs both through the King and, of course, his lineage, but also through Queen Camilla too.
James, just the big picture of this ceremonial. Katie's reminded us that this is part of the great patriotism of we British, the way that we do these extraordinary moments. But this mall is actually a sort of Edwardian creation itself, and tell us a bit about this site we're seeing.
Well, it's just magnificent, isn't it? And you can't be a Brit and not look at this and have your chest swell just a little, because we just do it so well. The magnificence of the Union flags lining the mall, the shiny breastplates, the scarlet tunics. It just looks absolutely fabulous. It always has done, and it doesn't matter what size the army is or the armed forces are. We always seem to have enough left in the bank for ceremonies like this, and long may that continue.
And it's lovely here, isn't it, to see the Prince of Wales explaining to little Louis what's going on.
Are they waving at you, Katie?
Well, I hope so. They'll be waving. They'll be waving for the veterans.
As soon as they heard your voice, they started waving.
Well, we know that Prince Louis loves to wave, and actually sometimes if we're lucky we get a double wave, particularly, and we will see this, of course, later on with the fly past. He absolutely loves that moment. But, you just saw the Prince of Wales, who, of course, has served himself with the RAF, probably explaining to little Louis, this is how it works. Louis hasn't witnessed a VE Day commemoration like this, and we are seeing more of the Wales children at these big state occasions, but it's down to his parents really to educate and to teach their children about important moments like this. But of course they're as much on parade as the horses, as the veterans. They are part of this spectacle. Again, that sense of continuing the history, the heritage, the traditions that we have become accustomed to.
Now I can see that the Major General, who we saw 20 minutes ago now, leave Parliament Square, is approaching the Queen Victoria Memorial where sits the royal party. There he is. And this tells me by the clock how long this procession is. There will be people at Parliament Square in the detachments that we saw form up who have not yet left, as Otto, carrying the Major General, frisks his head approaching it. Look at him. And there will be a reminder of the three forces, the tri-service cooperation, James. No one is above anyone in recalling how this effort was between all three services.
Absolutely. And just before the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943, the then General Sir Harold Alexander made the point that the Army, Air Force and Navy must become a brotherhood. And it's indicative, I think, of the fact that Britain is an island nation and that most of the operations in the Second World War were amphibious and required all three services.
King is on his feet, taking, as the Major General salutes. King takes the salute because we now know that the front of the procession has reached the monarch, and that's the appropriate moment as the Major General rides by for the King to exchange the salute. James, the ceremonial which you've spoken about with the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery, at the end of the war, how much of a fighting force was the United Kingdom? How ferocious had we become?
Very good, and I think that there's often a sort of narrative that suggests that Britain was somehow sort of hanging on the shirt tails of the Americans and sort of got lucky at various times, but actually it was a very, very proficient armed forces by the end of the Second World War, and really from kind of halfway through the war, I think. You know, on air, in the air, on land, and particularly at sea, Britain was very, very efficient, ruthless, and protracted the war with enormous efficiency, I would say.
I mentioned it's a tri-service victory on Victory in Europe Day, but let me go through the services before we leave viewers later on this afternoon. Some of the key moments in the army in the World War II. Difficult question, but what would come to mind?
Well, I would say the successful evacuation of Dunkirk. Of course, that was in part down to the Air Force and the Navy as well, but a very well organised retreat. Obviously, Alamein is a big turning point. That's the first time that a British army defeats absolutely emphatically an Axis forces in the field, or German forces, I would say, as well as Italian. But there's a whole host of key moments. I suppose the victory in Tunisia, bigger in terms of troops and material losses than the Germans suffered at Stalingrad. And that took place in May 1943. Then you've got the invasion of Sicily, the invasion of Italy, the capture of Rome on 4th of June 1944, of course D-Day, and the performance they played in Operation Market Garden, the ultimately unsuccessful but still heroic effort to make a breakthrough into Germany in September 1944. Operation Veritable in February 1945, crossing into the Reichswald on the western edge of Germany and through the city of Cleve. A huge operation. You know, Britain was there for the long run, and the British Army had to grow exponentially from after the defeat of France in June 1940. A very, very small army in 1939, and had to grow to a huge extent. I mean, there were 85 raised divisions. A division was a unit by which we judge armies in the Second World War. If you imagine about 15,000 men, that's not far off, give or take. It was a huge commitment. And by 1945, the British Army was exceptionally good. 75% conscripts, well armed, well led, and performed immensely courageously.
And again, we can't resist taking a look at the Wales children, and I think this will be a very important moment for them. Of course, we've seen them at important occasions. I think most recently, people will remember seeing the three children at the coronation. Look at Prince George there. I mean, he was only 9 when his grandfather was crowned. He had that very important role as master page to the king. He is witnessing these historical moments unfold, and I suppose with a level of understanding that one day it's going to be him being head of the armed forces. Of course, his father before that, but this all feels very much like tutelage, from a very young age. That very important sense of learning, and he's learning by witnessing, learning by watching these moments, understanding a very important connection between his family and this. And the family of veterans, the military family, which is so connected with the royal family.
Scotland the Brave, let's listen in to the pipes and drums. Now, just behind the pipes and drums, we're looking at the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry, a historic organisation, one of the most decorated female units in the world. And there they are, major contribution to the war in the field. They worked mainly in France. They're walking shortly towards the Women in the War monument. And James, it seems this must be the time as they look to the cenotaph and shortly reach the Women in the War memorial on Whitehall, to ask you of the role of women, both on the home front and in service.
Well, it was actually huge. By June 1944, at the time of D-Day, there were 467,000 women in uniform and a further 1.635 million working in the armaments industry, which represented about a third of the workforce. So a huge contribution. Over 73,000 Wrens in the Navy, 199,000 in the Army, 174,000 in the RAF, and 19,500 nursing, of which about 6,000 were fannies. And of course, of the 50 women that were sent to France as couriers and agents, 39 of them were fannies.
And the pipes and drums and the drums and pipes are reaching the Women at War Memorial. There it is. Let's just listen to the pipes and drums and reflect on this monument.
It's also worth pointing out, as we talk about women and the role that they played in the war, of course, the late Queen Elizabeth served, didn't she, in the Second World War. She trained as a mechanic. She was only 18 years old at the time, a mechanic and a military driver, and she served with the Auxiliary Territorial Service. And again, it was very much that idea of not just wanting to support the military, but actually carrying out that duty, working, wanting to be a part of it, which the late Queen Elizabeth exemplified.
Yes, I took a trip down Whitehall a couple of days ago, retracing the steps of Her late Majesty when she was Princess Elizabeth. She slipped the grounds of Buckingham Palace with her sister Margaret. She walked among the crowds, and James, she said she had tried to pull her hat down so people wouldn't recognise her, but her Grenadier Guardsman said she was improperly dressed and she had to pull her cap back up, and she walked all the way from the palace down to Parliament Square, the route that we're watching in reverse.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, isn't it? And it's wonderful that the princesses were able to have that kind of brief moment of normality, and in an abnormal moment, an extraordinary moment, but to be able to sort of join the masses, join the people, rather than live in that sort of gilded cage of Buckingham Palace. I think it's a great story. There's so many good stories of that day, of people, of revelry, and I remember one old veteran telling me that Tom Pocock, who became a very eminent biographer post-war, telling me how he spent Green Park lying on the lap of a gorgeous girl, looking up at the leaves and the sky and having champagne poured into his mouth.
Well, that's victory in one little symbolism. And more on the Queen's story, which we've been researching here, when she was a princess with the people, a princess in the crowd. They came back to Buckingham Palace and they joined the crowd calling for the King and Queen to make another balcony appearance. Of course, that was her mother and father. And she later recalled that as they came out, it wasn't completely accidental, because she'd sent a note in to say, would you come out now? And they surely did.
Well, they did, and the Queen did describe that sort of impromptu night, as it was, as one of the most memorable nights of her life, because, of course, it would have been. She got to see the celebrations from a completely different perspective, and, you know, they joined those street celebrations. Reportedly, they even joined a conga line through the Ritz with other revellers. So to have that sort of wonderful experience, I'm sure, did stay with her for her whole life. And of course, that she managed to get away with something like that without being recognised would have been very, very special.
So
and what a perspective, by the way, to see the balcony from down there on the Mall, when of course she was so used to standing up on the balcony.
I'm sorry for speaking over you there. There's the Prime Minister, and he's watching with interest. James, the civilian Prime Minister is the one who sends our troops, often young 18-year-olds, into action. It's not always popular. I mean, no, this is not the story of the Second World War, but the public has at times been very angry with historical figures. It's a part of the history of the United Kingdom.
Yes, and you know, one of the reasons why Chamberlain absolutely resisted going to war in 1938 during the Munich crisis was because 92% of the population were dead against it. And he knew that he couldn't really do this without some form of conscription. And when he finally brought in conscription in the spring of 1939, he did so with not only a very heavy heart, but also with massive political reservations. As it turned out, that it worked out fine. But he didn't know that at the time, and it's a very, very big deal. But, of course, the first role of the government is to defend the people of the country they're representing. So when you become Prime Minister, that's part of the package, is you have to be prepared to do that. You have to know that when the time comes, you might have to make that call.
VE Day, 80 years on, May the 8th, 1945, listening to Sophie and her guests. So important to remember the war is so painfully still going on.
Yeah, it's just the totality of it. I mean, it's incomprehensible now that the whole nation was geared to fighting this war.
And it didn't end on this day.
It didn't end on this day. It ended on the 15th of August 1945 with the surrender of Japan, and then the final ceremonies were on the 2nd of September 1945 on the decks of the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, and then there were subsequent surrenders in the Philippines and elsewhere, and China on the 3rd of September 1945, and then that was it. But what a different world it was then.
I'm hearing the crowd applaud the Ukrainian detachment. You can see, look over there on the far side of the Mall.
And their march is the absolute antithesis of the Russian goose step, isn't it?
Yes, I can picture it. Now you make it. Now you make the contrast. In fact, listening to the archive of the time, and a reminder that the UK fought with the Soviet Union, and one of the reports I was listening to of a Canadian commentator in Piccadilly sees Royal Navy servicemen climb up a lamppost like monkeys, he describes them, and plant a British flag and a Soviet flag at the top of the lamppost in Piccadilly, James.
Well, we were very suspicious of communism and the rights of the Bolshevik states in the late 1930s. And all our prejudices seem to be confirmed with the invasion of Poland by the Soviet Union in September 1939, which of course happened just a couple of weeks after the Nazis had invaded on the 1st of September. But after Germany invaded Soviet Union in June 1941, we changed our tune a little bit and gave them considerable material support, it has to be said. And that was the origin of the terrible Arctic convoys to get supplies to the Soviet Union to help supply the Red Army. But it was quite a major PR campaign, I think it's fair to say, to make us a little bit more simpatico to Uncle Joe, as Stalin was called. And there's no question that the loss of Soviet lives in the Second World War was immense and far outstrips anything that any other nation in Europe experienced.
It's such a complex and important part of our history to study. And in many ways, that's the point of the day, is it not? The message from 1945 can't be forgotten, said those who delivered it at the time.
Well, absolutely, and I think the point is the vast sacrifice. I mean, tens of millions left dead by this global conflict, millions more displaced, the whole global order completely changed, much of Europe and particularly Germany absolutely in ruins. I mean, city after city completely destroyed by this terrible cataclysmic conflict.
It is very moving, isn't it, to see this flag, to see the presence of the Ukrainian troops. And I think that will definitely mean something to the King, because he has praised very publicly the resilience of the Ukrainian people. He's spoken about their determination and their strength. Both he and the Queen have been very supportive of President Zelensky and his wife and of the nation. They've had quite a few meetings together. So I think that will be a very moving sight to King Charles and indeed to the Queen.
Now we must talk about the Navy, led by the band of the Royal Marines. I said earlier we will go through some of the extraordinary achievements of each service, remembering that it was a tri-service victory. But what would stand out as some of the main Navy losses, the main Navy achievements of the Second World War, those 6 long years, James?
Well, the losses were enormous, from the losses at Dunkirk through to, we remember HMS Hood that Ross Kemp was talking about, his relative was involved in that. Prince of Wales in the Pacific and the Repulse. The Malta convoys, of course, that lifeline to the tiny Mediterranean island that was so important to the entire Mediterranean campaign. But the triumphs were many, and not least winning the Battle of the Atlantic with the help of the Americans, but also, particularly, it should be said, the Royal Canadian Navy, who rose from 3,500 strong in 1939 to the 4th largest navy in the world by the war's end, and having 10,000 Royal Canadian troops, servicemen on D-Day alone, played a huge part. And the Battle of the Atlantic is really the most important and consequential theatre of the entire Second World War. And the Royal Navy was just superb. I mean, it was just an example of military excellence, and I think we take it for granted, and it's harder to go and visit the sites that the Royal Navy had some of its greatest triumphs. I mean, not many people are going to go and cross the Atlantic and think about the mid-ocean gap in the same way that you can go to the beaches of Normandy, for example. But let no one forget, the Royal Navy in the Second World War was absolutely immense. In terms of seamanship, in terms of gunnery, in terms of skill, of mine clearing.
I must take this moment to recall the Merchant Navy.
Absolutely, because we started the war with around 10,000 merchant vessels and lost around 2,400. And although some 83% of all transatlantic convoys got through unscathed, what everyone forgets, of course, is that those ships were going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and 25% were sunk. And the Merchant Navy especially was drawn from peoples all around the world, many of whom are completely forgotten to this day.
Tell me the brooch that the Queen is wearing, Katie.
Yes, this is an important brooch because she's wearing the brooch of her father's regiment. Now, of course, Major Bruce Shand was Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Lancers. I'm so sorry, the Queen is now Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Lancers, which, of course, was her father's regiment. So very significant for her to be wearing that brooch today. She'll be, I would imagine, wearing it with a great sense of pride. This is a really important regiment to her. It's got that personal collection. And of course, she is Colonel-in-Chief.
So we're looking at the army contingent, and it's a reminder to me of the length of this parade. 1,300 individuals from the 3 armed services, the civilian uniformed services, the cadets. And if you've been kind enough to join our programme over the last couple of hours, you'll know that this parade assembled more than an hour ago to bring this absolute precision, and it's all leading up really to a fabulous fly past. And I imagine even now, to get the timings right, the Air Force will be taking off to get everything right in timing. And James, when we look at the Mall now and the people who are lining it in the quite chilly 80th commemoration, what would this scene have been like 80 years ago?
Yeah, well, you would have... well, on the 5th of May, of course, that was the day that the German troops surrendered to Field Marshal Montgomery on Lüneburg Heath. So the celebrations began after German radio broadcast the announcement on the afternoon of 7th, and that's when the celebrating began. We're looking at the Royal Air Force Marching Department. Most of the Royal Air Force personnel on parade are from the King's Colour Squadron and 34 Squadron RAF Leeming. 3-4 Squadron RAF Regiment is a specialist unit established in 1951, originally to provide ground defence for airfields. It's a highly trained force which can deploy globally to protect air assets in high-threat environments. Let's turn our attention to the record of the Royal Air Force. I'm thinking myself of Bomber Command, the famous planes that one of which we're going to see go overhead. What should the Royal Air Force record be for our viewers today? Well, the RAF was exemplary in the Second World War. It was an absolutely key part of Britain's defensive system. Built up in the late 1930s, we had the first fully coordinated air defense system anywhere in the world, which is one of the reasons why we resisted the Luftwaffe in the summer of 1930. And this was all part of the kind of steel, not our flesh policy. The idea to use global reach, mechanization, modernity and industrialization to do a lot of the hard yards so that our frontline servicemen didn't have to. And although there was a huge sacrifice in terms of the men who took part in Bomber Command, almost 50%, it was a comparatively, in the big scheme of things, small number, and this was all part of denuding German efficiency, and was carried out with increasing success and efficiency as the war progressed.
And the Battle of Britain, to this day, the faces and the names live on as part of our continuous island history going back more than 1,000 years.
Well, it was an absolutely crucial moment because the Germans intended to invade, and their first task was to destroy the RAF, and they failed absolutely utterly. You know, out of 138 airfields in Britain, they only managed to knock out more than one for more than 48 hours, which wasn't a great record. And part of that was the efficiency with which we had our defense system, the speed with which we were producing new Spitfires, which was between 2 and 3 times as many as the Germans were producing, the tactical skill and flexibility of our commanders, the skill of the pilots, and the huge sacrifice that they made.
And the Prince of Wales?
Absolutely. I mean, listening to James, you sort of only need to look at those images of the Prince of Wales with his son, and of course he's in his RAF #1 uniform. He served with the RAF, with the Search and Rescue Division. Of course, he had his wings presented to him by his father, who also served in the RAF. You've got the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh there. And again, you know, in military uniform, we know that Prince Edward, when he was younger, he served in the Marines. Again, this whole important connection with the military, but certainly when it comes to Prince William, he wears those wings that were presented to him by his father with great pride.
The mass pipes and drums, they're made up from infantry soldiers of the Foot Guards Battalion. The Irish Guards, the drums and pipes, were formed during the First World War. The first two sets of great Irish war pipes were donated by John Redmond, the leader of the Irish Parliamentary Party, whose son was serving with the regiment as an officer. Let's listen in. The uniformed civilian services who are on parade today, I'll mention in a second. We're looking at the Princess Royal, Katie.
Yeah, she's going to have an important role over these coming days. She is in the fanny uniform. She's going to be very busy. She's going to the Channel Islands. Again, sort of standing in for the monarch, representing the King around Britain during these important days of commemoration, and of course, military links that run very deep for the Princess Royal as well. She holds many of her own military titles.
And behind, the uniformed civilian services, the police service, the fire and rescue service, the ambulance service, the St John Ambulance, the British Red Cross, His Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, the Women's Royal Voluntary Service, His Majesty's Coast Guard, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, and 6 representatives of the Merchant Navy proudly walking past the Queen Victoria Memorial and the King on the dais, and James reminding us very eloquently of the role of the Merchant Navy in keeping us alive during 1939 to 1945. The events today marking Victory in Europe Day, and James and guests with Sophie reminding us the war did not end on this day. Now, this is one of the bands I think I saw first in the whole day. It's the band of the Boys and Girls Brigade. Let's listen in to them on their proud day. The Girls Brigade is part of a global fellowship all around the world. It's 130 years old. And the groups participating include from the 3rd Ryde and 1st Newport Girls Brigade, both from the Isle of Wight. St John Ambulance Cadets. Attending Dillonhurst, the St John Ambulance National Cadet of the Year, identified somewhere in there. I think that must be him in the middle with the gold braid. Yes, that must be the Cadet of the Year from the St John Ambulance in the green uniform to the rear of our picture. And these youngsters are also getting a round of applause from the crowd. There are volunteer police cadets, the scouts, the army cadets, the fire cadets, girl guiding, Jewish Lads and Girls Brigade, the Royal Air Force cadets, the Royal Navy cadets. James, the cadets who were old enough would have served as cadets and then gone to war. And then at the same time, we have thousands of evacuees. The role of children is recorded. This is very moving.
Well, yes, and this is it rather underlines the point that the Second World War affected every man, woman and child in a way that no other conflict has. Really very directly. I mean, from the aerial attacks on Britain and the Blitz, of course, which ran from September 1940 to May 1941, the evacuation of children into the country. And, of course, you know, you had school children also joining local home guards and playing their part there. So, yes, it's a war that affected everyone, not least the nation's youngsters.
Let's listen in. Now, let me take a moment to tell you what's coming up in our broadcast today. We're so pleased and proud you're joining the BBC coverage today. We're aware that there will be a story in your family, and some of these images will stir that stronger than others. And here are some proud family members braving the chill with a spare umbrella hat, always a very good idea. So what's coming up is that the rear of the procession will arrive at the Queen Victoria Monument. The royal family will then go inside Buckingham Palace. They will meet veterans in the garden. And then in just 20 minutes or so, we'll start to see the preparations after the tea party for the flypast, which is coming up in less than an hour from now, with the King leading his family and the nation from the balcony of Buckingham Palace 80 years on from Victory in Europe Day. The flypast will have 23 aircraft led by a Lancaster bomber made in 1945. James, as we look at the next few months in 1945, so Churchill greets the crowds, we've recalled that moment. And then you'd have to have gone back inside Downing Street with talking about the fighting in the Pacific and Japan and all over the world, and mixing this great celebration with the war that was ongoing.
Yes, absolutely, and the prospect of the looming Cold War as well. I think, relations with the Soviet Union were splintering quite badly by this point as well, so that looming up. So the end of war in Europe brings a whole host of problems, a continent in ruin and disarray as well.
Now, the Major General will call the procession to an end as he approaches His Majesty, the King. I hope you heard, Your Majesty, that concludes the parade. Otto, carrying the Major General, has done a fabulous job. I accused him of being slightly frisky. I should take that back and say that Otto has been exemplary on parade. 1,300 individuals proudly representing all parts of His Majesty's armed forces have processed from Parliament Square, the crossroads of our history, our past and our present, and our seat of our current government, past the scene where Winston Churchill led jubilant crowds. I read that he conducted them singing Land of Hope and Glory. And we've seen cadets, we've seen members of the uniformed civilian services all process from Parliament Square through Admiralty Arch, up the Mall, towards the Queen Victoria Monument. The royal party is greeting the veterans and the guests who've been enjoying this display. The best seats in the house reserved for the wartime generation. Among those sitting there, Bernard Morgan, 101. He joined in 1942, aged 18. He joined the Royal Air Force. And in fact, he was a code breaker during the war. The equipment was so sensitive, he couldn't risk it being captured by the enemy. He landed on Gold Beach at 6:30 p.m. on D-Day, and he became the youngest Royal Air Force sergeant to land in Normandy during the war. 2 days before VE Day, Bernard Morgan received a telex to say, "German war now over, surrender effective sometime tomorrow," but he had to keep it secret. He had a big party with his comrades. They lit a huge bonfire and celebrated late into the night. Bernard said It's so important we make the most of these opportunities to remember what happened, not just to celebrate the achievement, but also to ensure that such horrors never happen again. James, you've met many of these veterans over the past 30 years. I have a feeling, although I know you as a historian, you just grew totally addicted about talking to this generation.
Yes, and one of the very first people I met was Geoffrey Wellham, who was known as Boy Wellham during the Battle of Britain. He was only kind of 18 at the time, and flew with 92 Squadron Flying Spitfires. And I remember going to see him in his local pub down in Mullion in Cornwall, and he picked up my pint and picked up his pint, and he said, "So here I was in my Spit, and there's this ME 109 bearing down on me." And I just remember thinking this was absolutely wonderful. And to hear it firsthand from someone who'd actually been there, it was just incredible. And yes, I've been lucky enough to meet sort of over 300 veterans from all around the world, and it's been just a privilege.
We await the national anthem. We don't want to speak over it, so forgive us if you think we've gone away. We're waiting so that we can hear the anthem.
Well, we have been listening to the sound of the procession and the applause and cheers rippling across the lake here in St James's Park. What a wonderful sight it has been. I'm here with royal journalist Roya Nicker. Lovely to see you here this afternoon. Your reaction to the procession that you've seen?
Well, it's been wonderful to see so many veterans, to see the royal family led by the King, of course, Commander-in-Chief. This is really the last opportunity, I think, the royal family feel for them to pay tribute and honour the service of the veterans that are gathered there today.
And you have a unique insight into what goes into putting something like this on.
Well, I'm lucky enough to be a civilian support rider for the Household Cavalry, so I have seen in recent weeks how much effort goes into putting on a parade like that. The regiment have a very close link to the royal family. Of course, the Princess Royal is very dedicated Colonel-in-Chief. It was the regiment that Princes William and Harry were commissioned into, so they'll be hugely proud and relieved to put on such a great parade today.
You recognised some of those horses, didn't you?
I did indeed. I ride some of them most mornings.
For the royal family, Buckingham Palace have been very clear that this week, because they have a lot of events, don't they, that are coming up this week?
They do. Her Majesty the Queen tomorrow will be at the Tower of London and looking at that amazing poppy ceramic installation. They're hosting a tea party this afternoon for veterans, and on Thursday, of course, that big national moment, the service of Thanksgiving at Westminster Abbey, where all the royal family will be there, again, paying tribute to the memory of the fallen and the veterans who are still around today.
And we saw about 30 veterans there watching the procession alongside the royal family. There are more who are going to be joining them now in Buckingham Palace for tea. There's going to be the Downing Street tea party. Buckingham Palace have been very clear, though, that this is the focus this week is about the veterans, and they're saying that in the light of the interview that Prince Harry gave.
Look, there's no getting away from the fact that it has been a bumpy few days and weeks for the royal family. It's been a bumpy couple of years with, you know, His Majesty and the Princess of Wales's cancer diagnosis. But they're absolutely determined that despite what we heard from and saw from Prince Harry in recent days on the BBC, the focus today and this week should be on the veterans and the public spotlight the royal family can bring to that, not on what, you know, any distractions we've heard from other members of the royal family.
And we saw the youngest royals, we saw Prince George there, and that is very symbolic, isn't it? It's significant that they are there very much at the front of it.
So much about today and about this week is going to be about the history of, you know, the war, the royal family's involvement. King George VI, you know, we'll be remembering him coming out onto the balcony, the fact that the king is wearing the same naval uniform that he wore. It's a lot about the generational support for the royal family to the armed forces.
And there are so many echoes today, aren't there?
There are echoes from, you know, what the King's wearing. Her Majesty the Queen is wearing a Lancers brooch. Of course, her father served in the Lancers. We've got, you know, as you say, Prince Louis, Princess Charlotte, Prince George there today. It's interesting that today on the balcony moments, which we'll see later, there will be no members of the royal family who were there on previous balcony moments because, of course, the late Queen Elizabeth was on previous balcony moments. So I suppose new generations coming to the history that's so important to the royal family and the nation.
And we're going to hear a wonderful interview shortly between the Queen and a veteran discussing the Queen's father's memories and the veterans' memories. Very important to her as well, the role that her father played.
Hugely important to her. I mean, he had earned two military crosses in the Second World War, Major Bruce, and she is always most happy when she is entertaining veterans and members of the Lancers in that regiment, which she often does at Clarence House. I think the fact she's wearing that brooch today is really important, and we'll hear a little bit more from her and how much it means to her in a bit.
And we're also going to be talking about the role that the royal family played during World War II, the Blitz, and they were so important for morale.
Hugely important. There'd been a suggestion at the outbreak of war that Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mother, would leave the UK, possibly go to North America or Canada with her children. And she famously said, "The children won't go without me. I won't leave the king, and the king will never leave." So they stayed and shared the dangers and the challenges of war with the rest of the nation, and that was hugely important for national morale.
And you can tell just from the images we've been seeing a short time ago when the king sitting there, the Queen, the Princess of Wales, all next to the veterans, how relaxed they are with them and clearly enjoy talking to them.
I think you can never underestimate the importance of the military veterans, those who serve now, to the royal family. In all the public engagements they do, I'd say, from my experience of being a royal editor, it is the most important thing in terms of their public spotlight.
Roya, thank you for now. Well, Alex has been watching the procession amongst all those crowds. Let's go and see what the atmosphere is like down on the Mall.
Well, I'm here with Ross Kemp. And Ross, you know, I heard you in the studio with Sophie earlier, and you were just saying how many connections you have to World War II in terms of your family. So it must feel really special to be here in the middle of the procession, this close to the action.
Yep. It makes me incredibly proud. Also, it makes me feel very humble. And it also makes me slightly sad because I know so many of my members of my family would love to have been here who served, but sadly they've passed. And that's why it's really important that we thank those veterans today and we remember the sacrifices that they made on our behalf, that we may enjoy the liberties that we have.
Absolutely. And of course we are remembering the celebration that happened 80 years ago, but there is, as we said, an undercurrent of reflection. There were many veterans sitting with the royal family. How do you think they'll be feeling today watching that procession?
Well, as I say, this is probably the last chance we'll be able to spend a significant year with them in terms of it being 80. So I imagine there'll be mixed emotions because they've seen so much and they're a very stoic bunch. They have to have been to have survived A, the Second World War, and B, to have lasted so long. So I remember members of my family generally didn't want to talk about what they'd been through and what they'd seen. And it was my nan who was at home looking after my mum. She was the one that gave me the stories of where they'd been. My grandfather left in 39, didn't come back till 46. My nan's two cousins died on the hood. So I remember VE Day being celebrated in my house when I was young, but it was always, there's an element, slight sadness about who should have been there that wasn't there. And that's why, for me personally, it's really important that if we have the opportunity to say thank you to our veterans, we do so.
Absolutely. And we saw the royal children watching the procession, and it's so lovely to see so many youngsters here, lots of them from the Scouts, as we said earlier on. How do those youngsters carry on the legacy? Because as you say, this is the last one where we'll be able to talk to veterans and hear the stories firsthand.
Well, that's why I got involved in VE Mail. So people in schools can go to VE Mail and they can get letters from the surviving veterans and they can communicate with them. And also, it's the most important thing for me is that the younger generations understand that sacrifice that was made, that enables us to live the way that we do and enjoy the freedoms that we do, because you can forget it very, very easily. 80 years ago is not a long time in terms of history, but we move at such a speed now that we can forget very easily, and that's why today is so important for me personally, but also it should be important for everybody that lives in Britain.
Absolutely. It's a very British affair, isn't it? And as we said, so lovely to see the young children coming out to see the procession. When they were receiving those letters from the veterans, what was their reaction?
They were drawing pictures, you could see the automatic connection. And again, I think it's so important for them just to understand the scale of what happened. And it wasn't just people from Britain, 450,000 Brits died, but also 87,000 members of the Commonwealth came and fought alongside British forces to overcome tyranny, and that should never, ever be forgotten. And that's why, if we can get that message out to the kids, they'll pass it on to the next generations.
Well, I'll certainly be talking to my children, I'm sure you will, about today. Ross, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Ruth Klauber, a very special guest. She joined the Women's Auxiliary Air Force as a mechanic, and she's here with us now. You are 101 years old, aren't you? You have an extraordinary story because you came over, you were born in Germany.
Yes.
Your father fled Germany, you were Jewish.
My father was a very wise man. He said he'd read Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, and the man meant what he said. And if he comes to power, we leave. So we left in 1933 in good time before you could take all your belongings and so on, yeah.
And you played your part in the war. You were asked if you wanted to be a cook, you said.
That's right. I didn't want to be a cook.
And then you could have been a batwoman.
That's right.
Which was?
Well, I didn't want to
pressing people's suits and things like that. So you ended up
keeping officers looking smart, making sure their buttons and shoes were polished.
So you said, no, not doing that. And you ended up being a mechanic, didn't you?
Well, I felt that I'd better be a flight mechanic, although I had no idea what a spanner was even in those days. But the course was absolutely amazing. I mean, at the end of it, we worked very hard. But at the end of it, they had taken a Tiger Moth, which is a single-engine plane, sort of to pieces, and with another person doing the test, we had to put it together and make it flight-worthy. So it was a really good course, practical work and theory of flight and hydraulics. And
so you spent the war fixing the planes. You were.
Yes, I did airframes, not engines. Yes, that's right. It was. It was an amazing life, really, and I think what has come back to me is how we all came from different backgrounds, different sort of education. There weren't that many women doing this, at least not on my station, but we all got on together, we all worked together, learned to trust each other, and I just wish that in today's world, people could not emphasize the differences, but work together, get things done. I do think difference is what people fear, and therefore is something we've got to think about, how to make it possible, even if when there's not a common enemy, for people to trust each other more. And so that was a very important lesson I learned, that you could get on with anybody. And of course I slept in a Nissen hut with about 10 or 12 other women. And yes, we all got on together.
Tell me about these medals that you are wearing here. Let me just show them to the camera there, because they are new, aren't they? You've only just got them.
They're new. Well, apparently there was a form you had to fill in when you were demobilised. I suppose to say, yes, please, I'll have my medals. For some reason, I didn't fill in that form. I imagine, looking back, I thought I didn't need this. I joined up because this war against Hitler, Nazi Germany, they'd overrun Europe. It was terribly important, and I didn't feel I needed medals. But I wish, for example, and my husband were here and could tell you about his war, because he did something very special. He was a Bletchley Park code breaker, worked under General Montgomery. And his brother was in SOE, you know what that is. He was a secret agent dropped behind enemy lines. I thought it's people who did those sort of jobs who would get medals, but not somebody who did an ordinary job.
How do you feel having them now?
Well, it's obviously very nice, and it's a bit unreal in a way. But about these, as I say, my daughter's written about these two people to sort of illustrate what ordinary people could do in wartime.
But that's what it's all about, isn't it? The extraordinary
yes, the
things
books
that
are
people
called
did.
Zinc and Cobalt. Her name is Sue Klauber, and I do think that it's another thing that I feel we need to remember, that it's ordinary people who do
extraordinary things.
Yeah.
Well, it's wonderful to talk to you today. Thank you so much for joining us and telling us your story. And we're going to watch the flypast, which I know will be of particular interest to you. So I hope you'll stay with us for that. Thank you. But let's get back to Alex now. She's joined by another guest.
Yes, I'm here with Dr. Sam Harding. Now, Sam's great-grandfather, George, well, he was quite the man, wasn't he? He served in the First World War and then was a trailblazing firefighter in the Second World War. Go on, tell us all about him, Sam.
Absolutely. Well, he joined the fire service in 1938, and thanks to the LFB trawling through their archives, we know he was the first black man to join the auxiliary fire service. And, of course, before the Blitz, he also started discussion groups among the firemen so that they had something to do while they were waiting for things to happen, and subsequently won the British Empire Medal for that. So, yeah, he was just one of those dynamic people who just can't sit still.
But then the funny thing is that you as a family didn't really know much about his history, did you?
That's right, that's right. For a long time, I mean, to be fair, I had a great aunt, Violet, who told me a lot about him. But I thought, well, I live in London and I'd not heard about this guy, so is it true? Is it a family myth? And then I was in Liverpool and I walked into a bookshop there and I saw a book with a few paragraphs about him in. Contacted the author, and then he was subsequently nominated by the author for a blue plaque, and he won the blue plaque. So from then, it's been a kind of a roller coaster.
Oh my goodness, how had the author heard about his story?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think bits of it had been around and about, and I think he was the one, the gentleman's name, Stephen Bourne, he'd gone and done the research and turned up some of these important items about him, yeah.
And so how has he now been commemorated? Because it's quite fantastic, isn't it, what's been done in his honour?
Absolutely, and the London Fire Brigade have been fantastic. They've they gave him a blue plaque on New Cross Station where he was stationed during the war. He's subsequently been on the first class stamp a few days ago. That was launched for VE Day. He's had a building named after him. There's been so many things. People have written songs, sent me photos, and his portrait's hanging in Whatley Hall in Sheffield. So it's
my goodness.
Super.
It is super to have a family member on a first-class stamp. That is quite something. And are the family watching today? Because here you are, near the procession, right in the heart of the action.
Absolutely. I mean, the support of my family has just been fantastic. They're all around the world, Trinidad, UK, Canada, US, and they've just been 100% behind me with unveiling this fantastic story. So it's been really exciting times.
And you did say that a lot of your colleagues in the NHS are watching today. I think we can give them a wave. I mean, they'll all be watching.
Renee and all the gang at UM. That's lovely.
Well, congratulations as well on having your great-grandfather recognised in such a wonderful way. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
More guests now. I'm joined by stars of stage and screen, Anne Reid and Sir Derek Jacobi. Thank you both for coming. You were young children at the end of the war.
Yes.
Weren't you? You were 7, you were 9 years
Yes,
old.
he's younger than me.
He's younger than you. How much do you remember of it?
I remember. Do you want to go?
No, you go.
I was staying on in a cottage in Castleton, North Yorkshire, a Howend cottage. I wonder who lives there now. And I remember it was there was no gas. It was just candles to bed at night and a coal fire. And I was staying with this sort of adopted aunt called Miss Collins, known to me as Hilda Collins, and as Auntie Collins. And in the morning of VE Day, she had a cow in a field, and we walked up the hill. And I remember dancing up the hill with swinging this metal bucket. And as we walked up, there was a cottage on the side of the road where there was a man who, an old man who had 3 goats, and he was called Dick. He was leaning on the gate, and he had a collarless shirt on. And as we walked past in the sunshine, he said, "'Twas our, the war's over." And I remember that moment. We walked up to the field, and my aunt milked the cow, and then we went back. And that night at Castleton, they built a huge bonfire on the hill, and of course there was lots of celebrations.
That's what it was about at the end, wasn't it? The light, because everybody talks about, it was almost 6 years in blackout. Do you remember that? The lights going back on.
Yes,
we were bombed.
I do.
Our house was bombed. Yeah, you were right in the middle of it.
Well, we were in London, East London. I was evacuated early on to a place called Little Brick Hill, evacuated into a pub, which I didn't appreciate at the time.
Big 6 years old.
No, but it was lovely, and I went to the local school. I think I was evacuated for about 2.5 years.
Really?
Yes.
And were you with any other siblings or on your own?
No, I was an only child. And I remember one incident at the school. They had a picnic, and we all had to bring a knife and fork with our names on them and a plate with our name on it. And I turned up for the picnic, and I wasn't allowed on the picnic because I was an evacuee. Can you imagine?
No. And you must have been about 5 years old at the time.
Yes. And I went back to the pub, and so they don't want me on the picnic because I'm an evacuee. My mother, who had come down that weekend because she stayed in London to work, dragged me back to the school and tore the headmistress apart. Took me back to the pub, by which time the pub had laid on a picnic. So I had a lovely day and up the school.
And you were here also during the Blitz, weren't you?
Yeah. Oh yes. I remember being sent out to get the cats some food. And a bomb fell on the local bus station, and everybody in the shop threw themselves on the floor, me included, and a lady very sweetly, because people were very kind. People helped each other all the time. She took me home because I was a bit frightened when they all clear and sounded, but being in London in the Blitz was...
Were you frightened?
Yes, I was.
I don't think I was aware of
I'm an arrant coward.
Yeah.
And do you remember on VE Day, we're watching the pictures now of everybody walking up the Mall, because we're going to have the fly past shortly, but the Mall was packed. London was just absolutely rammed with people who were celebrating, wasn't it? And that was going on right across the country.
I was in Trafalgar Square.
Were you?
On my dad's shoulders.
Wow.
A flying angel, it was called.
Do you remember that?
Yes,
I mean, you were so young, and you remember that vividly, do you?
Square, yes. And the lights came on. The Bovril sign came on.
That's amazing.
And because it was all blackout during the war, yeah.
And you must remember, Anne, as well, the celebrations that went on.
Yeah, well, I remember they built a bonfire at Castleton, but then when I went back to Redcar by the sea, where we were actually living, there was a big street party, and because my mother I had 3 older brothers who were all in the war, and my mother had more, and my father had more people away fighting in her family, so she was asked to cut the victory cake. Apart from that, I don't remember anything else about the day, but we were bombed in the war. You see, you were in London,
yes, we were.
And we were way up in North Yorkshire by the sea, but we were actually had a bomb in our house and it didn't explode. It was the only one that night that didn't explode.
Wow.
I know. Otherwise,
and you
I
were
wonder
there.
who
You
would
were
have
at
been
home.
sitting here. Pardon?
You were there at home when it.
Yeah, yeah. We had to get out in the middle of the night because it was went under the house. It was the only one.
Oh.
I know. I've always thought, if they'd been packed in the plane in a different order, would have been another story.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the bomb the street was cordoned off for 3 days, and because the gas mains went up and everything, and then the bomb disposal guys came and dismantled it, and they gave it to us, and we kept it in the shed. I wish I'd kept it now. Could have made a lamp out of it.
Well, do stay with me because we're going to talk to you more in a moment. But the King and Queen are going to be taking their places soon on the balcony of Buckingham Palace to watch the flypast. Queen Camilla's father, Major Bruce Shand, served in the 12th Lancers during World War II and earned the Military Cross for his bravery during the Battle of Dunkirk and a second at El Alamein. A few days ago, Her Majesty invited one veteran along to Clarence House to share his story with her.
Mr. Douglas Cracknell, Your Majesty.
Good morning. You look very young. You belie your 99 years.
Thank you.
Well, it's lovely to meet you.
And it's lovely to meet you.
This is, from the Legion d'Honneur.
Yeah, just give me that.
I think you should be very proud of that.
I am, yes.
I'm always fascinated to talk to any of the survivors of the war. Do you sort of go back and think about it?
I do a lot, yeah. We went over to France and went on to Hill 112, and that was where we lost a lot and lots of men.
Yes.
And I lost all my mates.
Goodness me.
Yeah,
yeah.
I got hit with a machine gun, and I held my Sten gun like that as I went down. And a bullet hit the Sten gun. My face was just all bits of shrapnel.
My father, who was captured at El Alamein, he was shot at, and the bullet went through one side of his face, came out the other,
Crikey.
and he was so lucky because it didn't hit his teeth or his tongue.
I always done what my father told me to do.
What was that?
Keep your head down.
Keep your head down. Yes, that is young. And well, all I can say, it must have been very sensible advice. Is, here you are today to tell the tale. My father, he kept a diary in the war. I'm just going to read you a tiny extract. Letters from home were very much the linchpins of our existence, and the arrival of the post at irregular intervals never failed in its excitement. I still recall the thrill some weeks after coming into the camp, when somebody appeared in the library to tell me that there were a dozen letters awaiting for me on my bed. To later generations, it's hard to understand the emphasis, particularly in wartime, that was put on the amenity of correspondence, not to mention the art of précis writing imposed by the limits of letter cards and the sheets of prescribed lengths. People in England were incredibly considerate and consistent about all this, and I remain eternally grateful to my many correspondents, family and otherwise, and especially to Ursula Wyndham, whose letters I wish I could have preserved, as they were models of wit, interest and style. And I just wondered whether you relied on letters coming.
We did. We really looked forward to a letter, yeah.
It must have lifted your spirits.
Oh,
didn't it?
that did.
Just
yeah.
getting a letter.
You looked forward to a
Yes,
letter.
yeah. What do you remember about VE Day?
I was in Bruges.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they read it out that the war was over. And then that was chaos.
Yeah.
They were flocking around you and... and I woke up 2 days later in the bar.
And you have no recollections otherwise?
2 days of my life I lost.
Lost. Well, they were probably lost for a very good reason. At least you were celebrating.
Yeah. Oh,
something wonderful.
That was absolutely chaos.
Yeah. Goodness me. And did you, when you came back from the war, did you talk about it? Or not?
Not a lot.
No.
No.
I don't think any of you did very much.
No,
I could never get my father never talk to us about it.
But I think really that should be talked about.
Well, we need it for future generations.
Let the younger ones know what
exactly
we went through.
Well, I think that's so important.
Yeah.
They're very important. Yeah. Because they wouldn't be here now if it wasn't for all of you.
Well, this is true.
So thank you.
Wonderful to hear them sharing their memories. The crowds moving up the Mall now to take their places in front of Buckingham Palace when that flypast happens in about 20 minutes' time. What a spectacular sight that will be. Military aircraft from past and present will fly over us here. Well, we were all laughing there. Wonderful story there from our veteran who told us that he missed 2 days because he woke up in the bath after VE Day. But that, I mean, that's people just could not believe it was over.
It was over.
Yeah.
No.
The celebrations that went on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I was in Piccadilly Circus. On my dad's shoulders. Huge celebration.
Yeah.
Huge celebration.
Which went on for days.
And the
days.
street parties, of course.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. I won Best Fancy Dress. I came as Mother's Worries. I was covered in ration books.
We saw a photograph of that earlier, actually. I'm glad you've explained what it is. I think we might be able to see it again, but that was a fancy dress competition.
It was a fancy dress competition in the street party.
Fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, it was
How amazing that you remember all
I remember that. I remember that there were races, and my mother was winning the ladies' race, and she fell flat on her face before she got to the winning post. Yes.
Now,
it was awful. We were all in tears.
So we're waiting for the royal family who will come out on the balcony in not too long now. And Roy, just talk about. We talked a moment ago about the echoes, and there really are so many. But the role that the royal family played during the war, the King and Queen refused to leave, didn't they? They stayed in London and Windsor.
They stayed here. I mean, Elizabeth and Margaret went to Windsor, but the King and Queen stayed here and spent a lot of time going in to visit the troops, going into badly damaged parts of the country. Famously, of course, Buckingham Palace was bombed in September 1940, at which point the Queen Mother said, I finally feel I can look the East End in the eyes. So it was all about feeling and showing solidarity with the nation as all of that was going on.
And I mean, Buckingham Palace was bombed 9 times during the war, wasn't it?
And very badly damaged. I mean, there are extraordinary photos of. I mean, the Queen Mother was in the palace when it was bombed in 1940. You know, and of course we had the young Princess Elizabeth in 1945 joining the ATS as a mechanic and a driver. And
there she is.
For years later, anyone that worked with her would talk about how much she loved cars and she'd bomb around all her states very, very fast because she knew cars and she loved cars. And that came from her military service. So today is so important and momentous for the royal family to show the generations of that support for the armed forces.
And you talked about the East End and the bombing there, because the King and the Queen would just go to the East End, go to places that had been bombed, often that people didn't know they were coming, but just to show solidarity with them.
Exactly that, and it was a huge morale boost for a lot of the people in the country. They used to go into hospitals, see people who had been injured. There's a really interesting statistic from the Imperial War Museum that showed that every time they went into a factory, the Ministry of Supply showed that production went down that day because they were so fascinated by the King and Queen. But overall in the week, production went up because it was a morale boost to people who were providing munitions. So, I mean, the importance of King George VI and the Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mother, staying here, staying put, going through the same sort of, experiencing the same sort of dangers with the rest of the nation was absolutely key to the morale of the nation.
And then on VE Day itself, we're going to see the royal family coming out on the balcony. They didn't come out just once, did they? They came out 8 times, because in those days, to be seen, you had to. I mean, they weren't being broadcast in the same way as we're broadcasting it today.
8 times during the day. Of course, young Elizabeth in her ATS overalls. Famously later that day, her and Margaret snuck out onto the streets of London, went to the Ritz, danced the conga, and I think years later, actually, with the BBC in 1985, the late Queen said it was one of the most memorable nights of my life.
They were out for ages, weren't
Yes, they were.
Hours. Yeah.
It's a sort of, they called it a Cinderella moment in reverse, as the Queen slipped out rather than,
yeah.
Wonderful, the idea of her being out there and watching her father, because she then, the King came out onto the balcony
and she was watching.
The Queen said that she had actually told her father, told the palace, that they were outside watching, calling for the King.
Ah, wonderful.
Wonderful moment. Do you remember the royal family's presence at all, or were you too young for that?
I think I was a bit too young, yes, yeah. I mean, the thing I remember about the war was kit bags in the hall, because I had 2 older brothers and a father away fighting, and my eldest brother was captured, and he was torpedoed in the Merchant Navy, and then in a prison camp for 2.5 years. He had his 21st birthday. And my cousin, my mother was lucky because she had 3 boys who came back and a husband, and all of them survived. But my poor aunt, she had 1 child, 21-year-old, and he was killed. Yeah. Yeah, I remember vividly seeing him I was shown his coffin, a weird thing to do for a child. But, ordinary people were doing the most amazing things in the war.
That's what Ruth Klauber was just saying to us. It's just ordinary people doing extraordinary things. But they were just so young, weren't they? You say
terribly young. When you
brothers...
look at your grandsons now and you think, my goodness, the idea of them having to go off and put a gun in their hands and kill people is just so bizarre. Frankly.
And when did your brothers actually come back?
Sorry?
When did your brothers actually come back?
2.5 years my brother was in a prisoner of war camp, and then he was repatriated in about 1942, yeah. And the others, the youngest one was too young to be in the war. He just joined at the end. But the middle one, Colin, he was on destroyers, yeah.
Amazing.
It's just weird now when you think about it.
Yes.
We were in this little seaside town, and there were bomb craters in the road.
Extraordinary stories. Thank you so much. Well, JJ Chalmers has made it through the crowds, and he's joining Alex by Buckingham Palace as they await the fly past.
Well, there is a great sense of excitement now, isn't there, as people are moving towards the palace in time for the fly past.
Yes, we're also joined by Squadron Leader Lauren Stewart, who's piloted aircraft in fly past like this. Tell me, what is that like?
So it's hugely just honoured to be part of it. So to do it, to fly, so I've done Wembley fly past, not Buckingham, but you have so many people that will be watching, and that you'll be representing your Air Force, your squadron, your base, so it's just a huge thing to be part of.
How does it work, sort of navigating your way across a city like this? You just sort of find the river and head towards the palace, or what is it?
I think in terms of, this has been 7 months in the planning, so I've got 23 different aircraft from 5 different bases, all the way from Oxfordshire, all the way up to RAF Lossiemouth, which is in the north of Scotland. So they're all meeting in the middle of the country, in Norwich, where they'll hold, and then the planning is huge. So they'll all fly down in essentially a big tube to come down to London, and then they'll fly down the river, and then looking for Buckingham Palace, which from the ground looks like it stands out massively. But if you just imagine all the different tall buildings around London, trying to find Buckingham Palace to fly directly down it is really challenging for the crews. But this is what they are really good at. This is their bread and butter. And I think you can say an aircraft that's going to fly over the Buckingham Palace at a very certain time is so transferable to operations. This is what these crews do every day.
Gosh, it is so intricate, isn't it? Which aircrafts can people look forward to seeing though as part of this fly past?
So this fly past is going to be brilliant, because we start the fly past off with the RAF Lancaster, which is a World War II aircraft. And then we move straight to all the operational fixed-wing aircraft. So we'll see Voyagers, we'll see A400s, and we'll see C-17s from Brize Norton. We're going to see a P-8 that's going to come all the way down from RAF Lossiemouth in Scotland. We'll see a Rivet Joint, which is an intelligence platform from Waddington. We'll then also have the F-35s from RAF Marham, and we've got Typhoons from RAF Coningsby, along with the Red Arrows who are coming from RAF Waddington. So we're pretty much employing everything that we've got with the RAF to do this fly past today.
Gosh, that was well remembered, Laura. And you mentioned the A400, which is, of course, your baby, so to speak. Tell us about that aircraft in particular.
So the A400, I love it because it's such a versatile aircraft. So you can do big logistics missions. So if you wanted to take lots of people a long way, you can do that. You can refuel from one of the RAF Voyagers, which we have, so we can get even longer endurance to take people further than they need. The other thing we can do, which is really good, is we can fly at low level. We can open up the aircraft and we can do aerial delivery. So we can drop either containers, or we can drop some vehicles, we can drop boats, we can drop people. So it's just a really useful bit of kit, and it doesn't need a runway, so it can land on a beach, it can land on the desert. Yeah. As long as it's got people to mark it out, it can get on there. So it's just a really versatile aircraft.
Well, after all that planning, I do hope you're able to enjoy it this afternoon. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you very much.
Well, what an absolute privilege it has been to be here today, I've got to say. Particularly as an Armed Forces veteran, to get to spend time with veterans of another generation is quite something. But to actually see the service on parade today, you know, standing on the shoulders of giants, it's extremely important. But equally, this is not the preserve of the Armed Forces. This is a date and a day that is important to all of society.
Well, you can see that just by the crowds that are here, people of all ages. It has been fantastic, a day that we will all remember.
Alex and JJ, thank you, with a great position there they have for the balcony appearance when the royal family comes out. Not too long to wait now. Roy, who are we going to see on there, and the importance of that appearance today?
Well, we'll see His Majesty the King, Her Majesty the Queen, the Prince and Princess of Wales, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis we're going to see up there as well, the Princess Royal too. What's really interesting is that there was a lot of thought given to this balcony appearance today. There was a question mark over not whether it would happen. I think the King gave a lot of thought and didn't want to feel that, you know, the royal family was overshadowing the veterans. But the feeling was, I understand, that given the historical context and importance of his grandfather coming out 8 times that day on VE Day, that it would be a lovely, you know, echo of that, and actually hope to celebrate the veterans. We're seeing them there, Princess Elizabeth in her ATS overalls. That actually it was something the public and the veterans would want to see today echoed. So that's why we're seeing it today.
And the veterans today, we think there are about 50 of them who are gathered up back in Buckingham Palace, who are all being given tea. Hopefully we'll see some images of them. But very important that they're right there in Buckingham Palace with the family.
I think, you know, for the royal family, we talked about it earlier on, there are balcony moments which we see at things like Trooping the Colour, you know, the coronation, big state occasions. This is slightly different because the focus is very much on the veterans, and afterwards they'll be entertained at Buckingham Palace. The King and Queen, William and Kate, will get a chance to sit down with the veterans, really hear from them, really hear their stories firsthand, and that will be a wonderful moment for those who served.
And then there are also tea parties. There's a tea party at Downing Street that's taking place, and plenty more events throughout the week. I mean, this is a long week of events which will culminate in VE Day itself on Thursday.
Yes, I mean, for the royal family, we've got the Queen will be tomorrow at the Tower of London looking at those poppies that have been brought back for the installation. And on Thursday, big moment, most of the royal family at Westminster Abbey, a service of thanksgiving, again giving thanks for personnel who serve now, but importantly, again, the veterans.
And what is very special is that they are able to do that now, because on the 75th anniversary, there were going to be big celebrations. This anniversary was going to be marked, but it all got stopped because of the pandemic. It was the first few weeks of the pandemic. How important is it, do you think, for the veterans that this is being marked today?
How important?
How important is it that VE Day is being commemorated?
I think it's very important.
Yes.
Yes. I think it's very difficult for the young generation to realise it's like some kind of story, but it actually happened. And I sometimes think that little bit of Channel, if you can imagine an army sitting over there waiting to come over to us, it was so close. And it wasn't it.
Yes,
We
it
could have been
was.
so quickly
Yes.
invaded. Now I suppose they'd come through the tunnel, but because it wasn't built then. Yeah, I don't think people realise how I think as a child I didn't realise, it's only since, how
dangerous
dangerous
what danger
position
we
this
were in.
country was in, really.
Yes.
So I think VE Day
Yes.
is terribly, terribly important.
And
Yeah.
those stories are being passed down, aren't they, still?
Yeah.
Yes, they
The
are.
veterans we've spoken to
Yes.
today, you can see how important it is for them that their stories continue to be told.
Very, very important, yes, because I mean, they were risking everything, every day, every hour.
Don't you think that Churchill, I mean, many things have been said and written about him, but as a child I remember he had a big influence on keeping the morale, you know, high.
Yes,
didn't
he did.
I do remember that.
He did,
yeah.
he did indeed.
Rather than, I do remember that more than about the royal
Yes.
family. And the king, yes, we remember.
I remember too, the first time I met my father was after the war.
The first time?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And
He was somebody that sent things home, wrapped in other odd things, and that was Dad, you know. And then they told both my parents said that when eventually he came home after the war, they didn't know how I would take to him, whether I'd like him, you know, whether I'd know who he was.
Yeah.
But that must have been so with so many families.
Yeah.
Well, there was something like 3 million children who were evacuees sent away from home, weren't they? And
Yes.
so many more who, as you say, their fathers had gone to the front.
Right, yes. I adored being an evacuee. I had a great time. I was 2 miles from Bletchley Park. Yes, and it was great fun.
I remember when my dad came home, I maybe shouldn't tell this story, but...
Go on, tell it.
Go on.
He came, he'd been in the Middle East for a long time. And I remember Mummy came and got me out of bed and said, come downstairs. And my father was wrapped up in the rug from lying on the settee. He's obviously got absolutely plastered the night before. And she said, this is your father.
Wonderful, wonderful memories. That's what it's all about, though, isn't it? It is about remembering the people who fought, those who died abroad, but it is also about remembering what happened to you, the people who were here, the people who were working very hard behind the scenes for the war effort.
Yeah.
Lovely stories from you. Thank you so much for talking to us this morning.
Pleasure.
Well, the crowds are now in position, awaiting the royal balcony appearance. Let's go back to Paddy O'Connell. And just to say, if you're blind or partially sighted, there is accessible commentary on the iPlayer with Jason Mohammed.
What fabulous stories, family stories with your guests, Sophie. This is the scene here. I've just been out with the crowds. They flocked down from their perches and pavements, and they've come here to see the balcony moment. Katie Nicholl, royal author, with me. What should we look for on what's coming up on the balcony?
Well, we're going to see the King, the Queen, we'll see the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children, we'll see the Edinburghs, and we are seeing the sort of core royal family. And, you know, when you consider this moment 80 years ago, it's going to look very different, but that sense of continuity is really important.
And let's remember that we're getting this rather intriguing net curtain image as the doors open, Katie, evoking what happened, several balcony appearances on this day 80 years ago.
No, absolutely. And to see the King and the Queen leading the charge here, stepping out onto the balcony, followed by the Princess Royal and her husband, Vice Timothy Lawrence. Of course, the Waleses and their 3 little ones making their debut for a VE Day commemoration. This is a very, very important moment. We didn't know if this balcony moment was going to happen, but it feels that it feels right. This feels very much what people expect now. These moments we associate with troopings, with jubilees, and now with the 80th commemoration of VE Day. And of course, the Duke of Kent, who's looking very, very frail, but in his medals, in his military uniform, just making his way over to stand with the Princess Royal.
Right, we are looking at wave 1 of the fly past. the Lancaster from the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, built in May 1945. This fabulous Lancaster. James, what is the significance of this beautiful big bird?
Well, it was the mainstay of the RAF Bomber Command. You know, it was the workhorse, could carry a payload of 10 tons, involved in some of the most famous RAF raids of the entire war.
Flown today by Flight Lieutenant Seb Davey and Squadron Leader Ernie Wise. Navigated by Wing Commander Mark McNulty. Wave 2, we're going to look at the Voyager and the Atlas. The Voyager in front, the Royal Air Force's sole air-to-air refueler. The fuel necessary for refueling operations, as well as the aircraft itself, are carried within the tanks in the wings, the centre and even the tail. Flying the Voyager, Flight Lieutenant Jason Olty, Flight Lieutenant Will Ricketts, Flight Lieutenant Andy Theobald and Sergeant Handy Bode. Behind, we're looking at the Atlas. On the right of our picture, it's an airlift that can carry a 30-ton payload over 2,000 miles. Listen to that thunderous roar. It can land on remote airfields, on short or unprepared strips too. The Globemaster provides the Royal Air Force with a long-range strategic heavy lift transport aircraft that can operate in support of combat, peacekeeping or humanitarian missions worldwide. Now, you look at the belly of that big bird and you can tell somehow that that's capable of lifting giant forces thousands of miles.
Can we just take a moment to appreciate little Louis, because he will always make a balcony appearance all the more enjoyable, but he really does seem to enjoy it.
Let's hope there's more. We're all looking at the Poseidon in the middle. That is a Marine Patrol aircraft, and on each wing a Typhoon. And the Poseidon has the latest technology to detect, identify and monitor targets above and below the waves. And the Typhoons are from RAF Coningsby in Lincolnshire and one from RAF Lossiemouth in Scotland.
We'll have lip readers on that, don't worry. Give us a minute just to hear exactly what they're saying, but a real moment for the children to be witnessing. Not their first fly past, but this one is special.
Wave 5 of our flypast now. This is the rivet joint in the centre, a dedicated electronic surveillance aircraft. Its sensors within soak up electronic emissions from communications, radar and other systems. And on each wing is the F-35B Lightning, a multi-role next generation of combat aircraft, which can operate on aircraft carriers too. Now, let me speak in advance of the Red Arrows. We will see 9 Hawks of the Royal Air Force aerobatic team and 4 Lightnings. The Red Arrows are led by Red 1, Squadron Leader John Bond. And there they clear our screens. James, you feel we'll be shaken in our little perch down here by the boom.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a splendid sight, isn't it? And there's nothing like fast jets and heavy jets going over you to kind of feel the kind of weight of air power.
Well, now, I promised you the national anthem, I think an hour ago, so I was very early in promising you the national anthem. Katie Nicholl.
Well, it's a spectacle, isn't it? This is the King's first VE Day commemoration. Of course, we've been so used to seeing our late Queen lead these commemorations. This is the King, this is the Queen, this is the future as well. That idea of continuity, that link with the armed forces, with the veteran community, that means so much to our monarch, to the Queen. A wave there from the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh. Of course, we had 8 balcony appearances 80 years ago. I think that's just one for today, but it was a special one to end on.
And my mind goes now to the veterans that are here, up to 50 of them. And there they are, in the crowd. Sophie, back to you.
Well, what a sight that was. We had a spectacular view here by the lake in St James's Park. And Ruth Klauber, you during the war worked as a mechanic on those aeroplanes. Your smile when you saw that Lancaster bomber come over, that sound must have just been, you recognise that instantly.
Well, it was all a very long time ago, but memories do come back, and that sound, yes, of your plane. And of course, when I first started work on the aerodrome, we had Wellingtons. There were 2 engine bombers, and then we had some Halifaxes, and then Lancasters. Fantastic planes. But of course, for me, there's a sad memory because a man I was very fond of was a pilot, Lancaster pilot, who was, after many successful sorties and distinguished flying cross and all that, he was shot down after an important mission. And I think it's terribly important, while we celebrate, for us to remember that war is a terrible thing. The people you love are killed. We must get back to the point where we felt we were after the end of World War II, that sitting round the table and talking would sort out problems. You didn't have to kill each other. We didn't have to kill each other. If you don't find a solution, you sit down again and you talk some more. I think we have to remember, don't you think, that, of course, we're remembering a victory, and it might not have happened. If you lived through it, there were certainly times when we felt maybe we're not going to win this war. And I can't help thinking of Winston Churchill, of course, who somehow made us feel we will get through it somehow or other. But the essential thing I think we have to remember is that young people must do all they can to avoid another war.
You are 101 years old. You are here today. Do you feel that events like this, which remind people, which mark what happened, which mark the end of war in Europe, do you think that will pass it on to the next generation? Do you think that helps to pass on that legacy?
Well, since you ask, I do wonder whether we're not glorifying war in some way, because to be on the winning side is obviously a good thing, but there's so much loss.
Millions and millions and millions of people
and
died.
I do think that young people must remember that, must get to know that. It's not just a bit of history, it's millions of lives are ruined. The good things we've built up are destroyed and have to be rebuilt. So I do think that as well as rejoicing, and of course the fly past is amazing, but many people died in these planes.
And that is going to be remembered, isn't it, on Thursday? There's going to be this service at Westminster Abbey, and that is all about that, isn't it? It's about marking the people who did not come back.
It will be, and of course, you know, we'll be hearing from the King on Thursday as well, who'll be echoing his grandfather's speech, you know, who talked, you know, on VE Day in 1945 about remembering those who didn't come back. There are so many echoes from the past. I just noticed there actually during the flypast, watching Prince Louis and the children watching it, the Princess of Wales was wearing her RAF wings brooch. Her grandfather was a fighter pilot. So. Absolutely, I mean, there is celebration for VE Day, but also remembering, and there'll be somber moments later in the week too.
And Ruth, I must ask you, when you were working on these aeroplanes, some of the ones we just saw going overhead, the Lancaster, as you said, did you get a chance to go up in them? Did you fly them?
Oh yes, of course. And of course, there was a wonderful system in the RAF. You had to sign for every job you did. And if it was a major job, now here's an interesting bit. The men who would, you'd be a team working on a major job, the men had to go on a test flight, the women didn't. But I loved flying in those days, and I would get myself a parachute and ask the pilot if I could come too. And so, yes, of course I went up in them, yes, yes.
And it was amazing because you started that job fixing those aircraft. As you said to me earlier, you didn't ever use a spanner. You didn't even know what one was. And yet you went on to be able to fix aircraft like that. That period of the war did really transform a lot of women's lives, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yes. Yes. I do think that yes, two important lessons. One, we can all get on together. We don't have to fight each other. We can talk and compromise. And yes, the other one is about learning from each other.
Well, we've got wonderful timing now because the flypast has happened, the crowds are dispersing, and it is suddenly, as you can see, pouring with rain outside us. But it's wonderful to have you here with your newly acquired medals, which you should have had such a long time ago. What does it mean, just a final thought from you, to be here today?
Well, of course, although I never expected medals, and so didn't even sign that form. I could have got them about 80 years ago, you know. But of course it means something, and reminds me that I was part of a wonderful organisation.
You certainly were. Ruth, it's been so lovely.
It's very, very nice to be here, to be talking about it.
It's wonderful to have you here, Roya, as well. Thank you both so much for joining us this afternoon. And that brings to an end today's spectacular events. We will be back on Thursday, which is VE Day itself, live from 10:45 in the morning as the King and Queen join World War II veterans for a service of thanksgiving at Westminster Abbey. Then later on, Horse Guards Parade will be the venue for a celebration to remember. A glittering array of stars will join together with the veterans to put on a party like no other at 8 p.m. that evening. I hope you enjoy the rest of today's bank holiday with street parties and celebrations. I hope you're not getting too wet. I'll be visiting Alex on the One Show sofa later at 6:30 this evening to tell you more about what's coming up this week. But for now, from all of us here at the BBC, it's goodbye.